Forward to as far as culinary delights are concerned. Here we go. So we've got a very, very busy night ahead of us. There have been many elections in the past. What's your election night routine?
When I was standing as an MP, it used to be go late to the polls. My team always used to say, have you not voted yet? But I always used to like to walk down sort of 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, just to get a feel for how the day had been from the people around the polling station. And then I have to admit it, I'd always then pop into the off licence because you know what it's like when you've been a candidate. When you get back from the count, you got to do something to switch off. It's a case of win or lose on the booze.
What was your tipple?
Huh?
What's your tipple?
Oh, it was just lager, you know, but...
Can somebody make a note of that, please?
Yeah. You have to do something, don't you, just to... when you get back. So, yeah, it was uniquely draining thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so when I was leading the party in Scotland, obviously we would do all of our own stuff that we needed to do. We had to organise when all the leaders went to the polls as well, so you'd coordinate the vote so that like you weren't all in the same place at the same time. I'd take the dog along for extra points, you know, because it's wall-to-wall on the television because they can't do any
Dogs at polling stations.
Dogs at polling stations, hashtag.
Yes.
Yeah, I love a bit of that.
Yeah.
And then on the night itself, I'd be in kind of central office and we'd be watching everything come in. I'd go along to my own count if it was an election that I was standing in. And obviously in Scotland we have lots of elections for the Scottish Parliament and the local elections, and as well as Westminster. And then you kind of go along to one of the big counts, and the way some of it works, there's sometimes 4 or 5 seats that get counted in a central place. So in Glasgow or in Edinburgh or whatever, go along to one of those and then do all the media rounds. So I would tend to be up right the way through the night. But you know, there's something about it, like win, lose or draw.
Did you enjoy it?
Loved it. I mean, I absolutely love the drug of politics, and even though there's bits of the job...
Do you miss it now? Or?
There's bits I don't miss at all,
Yeah.
and my lifestyle and being able to, you know, be at home for my family and my child and everything makes such a difference. But there's the only kind of FOMO I get is election campaigns. I actually don't miss being in the Scottish Parliament.
Did you ever find...
I love campaigns. I love them.
The worst bit was always the Friday after any election, because you're just a little bit more tired and a tad more emotional maybe, and a bit frayed at the edges.
A bit more grumpy.
Yeah, but then
It's the crescendo.
But then you're out there in the middle of the glare, and it's in many ways when you've got to be more at it, you know, in terms of your kind of focus.
I always had a bit of an emptiness.
It's showtime. O2 customers get early access tickets to Dua Lipa at Wembley Stadium, only on Priority. O2, see what you can do.
We've had some difficulties.
Marriage has challenges, as she tried to kill me.
The Empress and I are at peace.
Husband?
Which? She is changing Russia.
She was not picked by God. They really hate me.
They love me, so it's hard to relate.
I will win. I am me. I will pull this off.
The Great on Channel 4. Starts Monday at 10.
We do Altogether Different right here on Channel 4, and that means election coverage too. Hope you've got the supplies, because we are pushing on until 9 a.m. We are live, so it's over to Krishnan Gurumurthy, Emily Maitlis, The Rest is Politics, and Gogglebox as Britain Decides. You can watch on 4/7 for the signed version. That's on Freeview Channel 49. There is some song language.
The clock is ticking.
The final votes are being cast.
And after all the speeches, all the promises, all the arguing...
It's time to see what Britain decides. Good evening and welcome to what is certain to be a dramatic and indeed historic night. I'm Krishnan Gurumurthy.
And I'm Emily Maitlis. We've come together for this election night. Thank you so much for joining us too. Well, as you can see, we're just a few minutes away from the polls closing at 10 o'clock. That's when we'll get a major indication of how tonight is going to pan out with our exit poll. Basically, a huge survey of how people voted today, and it should give us a good idea of what the actual results will be.
A lot of pledges from the politicians over the last 6 weeks. Tonight, our manifesto is one you can absolutely rely on. We promise you drama. We promise you all the results that matter, and we promise you the best analysis around.
That's why we've also teamed up with Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell from The Rest is Politics podcast. We're delighted to say they're with us all night to share their insight and opinions.
Now, over the next 11 hours, and with no commercial breaks, our aim is to help make sense of what tonight means for Britain and for all of us. Having said that, the one thing we're absolutely not allowed to talk about before voting ends is what might actually happen tonight.
If this was the Euros, kickoff is nearly here. This is the pre-match build-up. But the rules say we can't talk about the game. So right now, our team needs to show unparalleled levels of restraint.
Alongside us, Channel 4 News political editor Gary Gibbon, and we're joined exclusively by an unprecedented lineup of politicians, starting off with Harriet Harman, former deputy leader of the Labour Party, who held almost every post as an MP for more than 40 years. Kwasi Kwarteng, who was Liz Truss's Chancellor for fewer than 40 days. And Nadine Dorries, the former Conservative Culture Secretary and a close ally of Boris Johnson. All three have stood down as MPs, but they're stepping up for us tonight.
And for reaction to that exit poll, we also have Sir Vince Cable, the former Liberal Democrat leader, and Widdicombe, who's backing reform, Murray Black, the former deputy leader of the SNP in Westminster, and Azim Zahawi, who's held senior posts under 4 Conservative Prime Ministers.
So I count 8 former MPs and 3 former Strictly contestants here tonight. Will Anne and Vince be dancing with delight? Worth staying up all night just in case. And who better to help us make sense of all the numbers we're going to be bombarded with later than a genuine professor of maths? Hannah Fry is with us.
I certainly am. Thank you. Yes, I am your numbers nerd tonight. And from this corner, we're going to be crunching all of that data from 650 constituencies to give you the swings, majorities, the best stories from the stats. But of course, there is only one number that really counts in the end, and that is number 10.
Now, you'll hear from lots of politicians tonight, obviously, but we're also the only place where you'll hear from real, actual people too. They're joining us from all over the country. We'll find out who they voted for today and why over the course of the night.
Cathy Newman will join us regularly too. She's escaped the studio. She's in Westminster tonight.
Yes, I'll be bringing you live reaction to that exit poll when it comes out in just a few minutes. And I'll be speaking to all the key players as the drama unfolds in the coming hours.
Now, of course, thousands of people are standing by to count all the votes in town halls, schools and sports centres. We should get the first results around 11:30. It's always a race to try to be the first one to declare, and it's almost always in the northeast. The fastest ever first result came at just 10:43 in Sunderland.
We have correspondents across the land stationed at the
It was just a dream.
Drama solved. Direct Line sponsors Showcase Drama.
Now, and with Through the Night coverage of the battle for number 10, we hand over to Tom Bradby and the team for the election live results.
The Prime Minister took us all by surprise as he launched his re-election bid in the pouring rain. And even his supporters might acknowledge it pretty much went downhill from there. The polls were disastrous, then catastrophic, then into potential wipeout territory. But were they right? Or could we be in for another shock? We are not far now from the moment of truth for the PM, for the pollsters, indeed, for all of us. The seconds are ticking down to the first strike of Big Ben at 10 o'clock, when the broadcaster's joint exit poll will give us the clearest indication of the new political landscape. Have we voted for change? And if so, have we done so decisively? On every election night, history is made. The party leaders voting earlier will, of course, have been all too well aware of the predictions of record-breaking shifts. So much on the line for each of them tonight. There are always 2 key questions. What is happening and what does it mean? We have what we believe is the best possible team to help you chart a course through what could be a turbulent night.
buckle up. The political map is about to be reshaped, and we've got our most powerful set of tools to get into the data from the exit poll and the early results to separate the signal from the noise so you can make sense of it all.
And we've got our biggest and best ever panel of experts. Former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon joins George Osborne and Ed Balls to analyse and interpret the story of the night. Robert Peston is here to give us his political insight and to mine his contacts.
This election has felt from the off like a huge moment in our history, partly because the last 14 years have seen so many shocks and the world remains so uncertain and dangerous. Will the UK choose a new path? And could we about to feel an earthquake that shakes our entire system?
And we have two of the most highly respected election experts in the country, Professors Colin Rallings and Jane Green, to break down the what and the why of the results. We'll have correspondents in every nation, in every region, with the party leaders and those constituencies racing to be the first to declare.
I'm in Blythe, where they're hoping to beat their local rivals across the North East by announcing the first MP of the new Parliament.
I'll be bringing you regular updates here in the ITV newsroom, where our results team will be taking calls from our journalists across the country as they aim to bring you the results before anyone else. Here with me throughout the night will be Paul.
Yes, Nina, I'll be keeping a close eye on stories emerging from counts across the nation as we learn how your vote will shape Parliament.
So, we are with you for the next 8 hours through every twist and turn of what is sure to be an interesting and might be an astonishing night. Welcome to Election 2024. The results live. Only a few moments to go now until the polls close and we can reveal the results of that joint broadcasters exit poll. To guide us through the impact of that projection for the new Parliament, we have an unrivalled panel of political minds who've been at the heart of power themselves when previous exit polls signalled the reshaping of governments, alliances and political careers. Let's get a sense from them of what they'll be looking out for as the night unfolds. Nicola, maybe I can start with you. I mean, like, you've been a leader, you've sat there waiting. What are you thinking at this moment?
Cast on the 4/7 channel throughout the night.
Well, as if we need to remind you, we are keeping an eye very firmly on the clock. It is ticking down. We've just over 5 minutes. We do need to be...
And it was like, oh, and then you've got to go to your count.
But it's a thing that happens before, because if...
Detective starts Sunday at 9 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
In our new podcast, we investigate some of the juiciest celebrity court cases and controversies ever.
A-lister trials, celeb social scandals, no case is off limits.
We get forensic and everything is evidence. So what's your verdict?
You'll have to listen to find out.
Join us for our new podcast, Famously on Trial.
Listen on BBC Sounds.
Good evening from us at BBC One. Matthew watching with you live. So now, with decisions made and results awaited, only one question remains. How long are you staying up for?
It's 5 to 10, and with millions of you having cast your votes, the polls are about to close.
The arguments of the campaign are over. The counting is about to start. So, let election night begin.
A very good evening to you. Welcome to our election night studio, your destination for unrivaled coverage over the next 10 hours as we discover whom you've chosen to walk through that famous door in Downing Street.
Last time round, Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party. We were still in the European Union and no one had heard of coronavirus.
Today, of course, the political landscape is very different and the leaders of all the main parties have changed. Sir Keir Starmer cast his vote this morning. Only 4 Labour leaders have ever been elected Prime Minister. Has he done enough to seal the deal with the British people? And can he lead Labour to its first victory in nearly 20 years?
Rishi Sunak is the 5th Tory Prime Minister in quick succession. He surprised the country with a snap election and has been fighting hard to hang on to power after the Tories' 14 years in charge. But can he cross Jeremy Vine's winning line outside number 10?
Every paving stone a parliamentary seat. You remember 2019 when Boris Johnson won all these seats and paved a path to the door of number 10. This time, can Labour turn the blue seats red and send Keir Starmer through that historic black door, or will the Conservatives hold them off?
This is the engine room of our election coverage, where we're keeping an eye on all the election centres right across the UK with an army of reporters. Fiona Bruce and Victoria Derbyshire are with the Labour and Tory leaders. And the race to deliver the first result is always fiercely contested. So we have our earliest risers on the hunt for the early declarers.
Hello, I'm in Blythe, where a recount in 2019 stopped them winning. But this time, this team is even more determined than ever. Do we think we can beat Sunderland this time?
Well, let's just see, shall we? Sunderland has won this race many, many times, and they're not giving up without a fight.
Here in London's Broadcasting House, our teams are poised, ready to gather and then verify every single result as they begin to come in. And of course, at the heart of it is Professor Sir John Curtis, who's been hard at work already all day with the exit poll team. And in just a few moments, we can legally reveal the results of all of those calculations.
That exit poll will indicate who will be heading here to the Commons, and Rita Chakrabarti will be checking all the numbers.
We're feeding all that data into the giant screen now, and in a few moments' time, I'll be able to tell you which seats are most likely to be changing hands.
If neither Keir Starmer nor Rishi Sunak win the magic 326 seats, could one of the smaller parties back them up? Ed Davey's Liberal Democrats would love to become the 3rd biggest party once again. Nigel Farage is back in frontline politics with Reform UK. And Kirsty Wark is watching the battle in Scotland.
I'm here in Glasgow, where we're expecting a night of high drama, with politicians using the results in Scotland to argue for or against independence. I'll be joined by the country's senior politicians, advisers and commentators to react to the big stories right through the night.
Ready for an avalanche of information and reaction? Our political editor, Chris Mason, is with us here in the studio.
So, we're seconds away from 10 o'clock and the exit poll, a first indication of how the night might unfold. More than 20,000 people took part on behalf of the BBC, ITV News and Sky in this first July election since 1945. 326 seats are needed to win. So, here we go.
And as Big Ben strikes 10, the exit poll is predicting a Labour landslide.
Sir Keir Starmer will become Prime Minister with a majority of around 170 seats.
The exit poll predicts that Labour will have captured 410 seats, adding 209. It suggests the Conservatives will have lost 241 MPs, landing on 131.
On to the other numbers. The Liberal Democrats up 53 on 61 seats. Reform on 13 seats. The SNP down 38 seats. According to this exit poll, on 10. Plaid Cymru are on 4, they're up 2, and the Greens are up 1.
A majority of notionally over 90 according to boundary changes, and we've gone in a huge swing in the other direction, potentially to a Labour majority. If
those numbers and the breakdown as we just digest that and look at the faces of some of our guests around the table and indeed in the...
Rigby, I was giving you a moment. Go.
Yeah, that is an incredible result. If you think that Starmer said he had to climb a mountain, he has scaled...
For Labour over the last few weeks, but I would say that
to win by just a smidgen.
Give or take, of 170. 170.
Which is...
Conservatives on 131 and Labour on 410. Brandon Lewis, as a former party chairman, just...
over the next few hours that the results will come in and will tell us the real verdict of the British people. But it does seem, as it has done all the way throughout this campaign, that Sir Keir Starmer has done something extraordinary, pulling back Labour from where it was in 2019.
Astonishing when you look at the Labour numbers, given where they were, given the extent to which they had been so comprehensively beaten last time. There was lots of folk in lots of political parties anticipating that that would mean they'd be out of power for at least a decade. And yet you look at these numbers, and of course we should insert the caveat, shouldn't we? But given the margin of that Labour lead in the exit poll, there is plenty of scope for that to be out by a reasonable margin and Labour still to be heading for a very sizable, historically big majority. Where we should insert a few more caveats, shouldn't we, is around some of the smaller parties, not least the Scottish National Party, by dint of the SNP merely standing in Scotland. There are fewer data entry points into that exit poll, so there's a bit more caution around that. Similarly around reform as well. So some things to sort of mark our card in terms of caveats, but in terms of the big story.
Start. And we'll go dig into this much later in the programme, but it's also a mandate for you to do something in Scotland.
Well, again, the Scottish margins could be tight. I mean,
we don't know yet.
I think it's really worth putting on record that a lot of the constituencies in Scotland had very, very large SNP majorities.
Because that focuses people's minds in those marginal seats, in those seats where a larger swing was necessary. I think we can be fairly confident about exit polls, Nick, as well. They're different to other polls, but this is very much in line, of course, with the opinion polling that we've seen through the campaign, because exit polls actually measure what has happened rather than intent.
Party to return, and here we have, if these poll figures are right, coming back with some 13 seats, and you can imagine how that would energise the Reform leader Nigel Farage. Presumably one of those seats would be his seat. It also has to be said, Mark, if these figures are accurate, you could see some political big beasts within the Conservative Party losing their seat at some stage this evening, because we know, for instance, some 16 of the 26 cabinet members were in vulnerable positions.
Great. OK, Chris, thank you. We're going to be getting much more from you throughout the night, of course.
We will, and through the night we'll be joined by a parade of political guests. Some of them will be in jubilation. Some of them will be very much at the other end of the scale. We're joined initially by Lord Mandelson, who is, of course, one
already,
of the architects of the 1997 New Labour victory. And Steve Baker, the Conservative, who doesn't know yet whether or not he is held onto his seat in Wickham. And we will come to them in just a couple of minutes. But I want to remind you of these numbers as they have been revealed by the exit poll, showing Labour on 410 seats, having gained 209. The Conservatives crashing down to 131, losing 241. 61, the Liberal Democrats, an incredible performance for them if they are correct, on 53 seats. The SNP crashing.
Some of it we can't talk about. There's a police investigation, an active one, and for legal reasons, you can't talk about it. I can't ask you about it. Nevertheless, there are going to be lots of people watching in Scotland tonight who are going to
percentage of the vote, low number of seats. Lib Dems might have got lower percentage, fewer votes, and 5 times the number of seats. So a lot of questions about our electoral system, but bigger than that, questions about Keir Starmer as he comes in. If he's got a small percentage of the vote, low net popularity ratings, which he was carrying in, he has a big majority. It's a bit misleading.
Well, Gary, I mean, just look at those numbers and take us through them in terms of your first assessment of what they mean.
Well, it's the Conservatives' worst ever result, and yet they'll be sighing with relief. It's true. It's an extraordinary situation, and it is an extraordinary...
In 2005, and they went back to 57 in 2010, and you will remember they were the coalition years with Cameron and Clegg, and then after that they were massacred, taken out.
And the thing is, look at...
And
okay,
now
guys,
they are
hold
back.
that thought a second. Ed Conway was actually in the room. Ed, you saw the reaction here. What was it like where you are?
I mean, let me just first of all go through some of the data points here, because I was there at the exit poll when these numbers were being put together, and so, you know, I have a bit of kind of extra colour I could perhaps give you on just on the numbers.
Prime Minister to lose his seat in a general election. That result comes at 4 a.m. Then you could have voters taking their revenge on former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Her result comes at 5:30 a.m. and
This is, of course, the polls have always been on the mark, haven't they? I think it's fair to say that these can be trusted to an extent. Is there ever
Eba, and a packed one at that. Look at this. I've established a fantastic panel for tonight. I've got former Labour advisor Matt Larser. I've got Tory P.
Activists and our candidates have been going out there, not taking anything for granted, and speaking to the electorate about what they believe matters to them and the concerns that they've had. And I think that the thing that kept coming back to us was that the 14 years the Tories have been in power and the chaos that they've had to tolerate is that they wanted that change.
And we'll understand tonight why you're at this stage a bit reluctant to crack a smile. It's been Keir Starmer's watchword all the way through, is to tell you
government that was in power during the pandemic anywhere in the world has now lost power. Yeah. In Germany, in France, in Australia, in New Zealand, soon to be in Canada, in the United States, in Ireland, and in 2026 probably in Scotland too. The appetite for change after the pandemic everywhere was pretty profound.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin.
Kirsty, thank you very much. Much more from Kirsty and our panel, of course, through the evening. But let me introduce my guests for the evening in this part of the building, here to help guide us through what all this means. To my left, Professor Ailsa Henderson from Edinburgh University is one of the country's leading political scientists and also sits on the Boundary Commission here on Scotland. More on that later in the programme, because they've had a significant part to play in how this election plays out too. To Ailsa's left, keeping her...
It's a tribute to him that he has managed to change the Labour Party and do what he's done.
Mi hynt mewn perygl yn ôl rhai o'r arolygon barna, gewn ni weld eu hwnnw'n cael eu wireddu yn ystod y noson. Ond mae hefyd yn werth sôn am y niferoedd na maen nhw'n rhagweld i reform. 13 o seddi. Fydde hynny yn rhyfeddol. Oedd Nigel Farage hunan yn gweud bod e'n disgwyl, gobeithio bydde ryw 6 miliwn o bleidleisiau i'w blaid yn cael ei bwrw heddi. Ond oedd fe ddim syniad sio bydde rheini yn cyfieithu yn seddi, achos y tebygolrwydd yw y bydden nhw wedi cael eu gwasgaru yn denau iawn. Trefniadaeth y blaid ddim wedi cael cyfle i wir ddwy'n ffrwyth yn y cyfnod byr yma o ymgyrchu. Ond os ydyn nhw'n cyrraedd 2 ar 10, mae hwnna yn ysgubol i reform. Plaid sy'n ddyflwydd oed yn neud mor dda ar ei hymgyrch cynta nhw.
But it is suggesting a landslide for Labour. We're waiting for the results to start coming in, and we have correspondents at more counts right around the country than any other broadcaster. So stick with us and analysing the results, getting a sense of how the evening is going to progress. is my colleague Rita Chakrabarti, who'll be feeding all that statistics and all the evidence into her giant screen there.
Exactly so, Clive. And I can bring you some of those forecasts. They are forecasts at the moment because it's an exit poll, but it is based on a balance of probability using data from the exit poll that we can calculate the probability of victory or loss in individual seats. And there will be some very well-known Conservative faces who are faced with a brutal night. They include Ian Duncan-Smith, former Conservative leader, of course. We calculate his chance of hanging on to his seat in Chingford in East London as less than 1%. Steve Baker, who is in the
The places which voted very heavily for Leave in 2016 at the referendum, and in some of the places that voted Conservative again in 2017 and 2019, and where they seem to have very big majorities at the moment, many people have decided that they can't go to Labour. They're not Labour kind of people. Lib Dems are perhaps not very strong there. They will have gone to Reform, and I think we'll see some of those areas where Reform will slip through the middle. Lib Dems done pretty well. They probably haven't got all that much more voting support than they got at the last general election. But we saw Ed Davey throughout the campaign with his very...
That Reform can start taking over the Conservative Party?
Well, it can certainly start having a very, very effective voice in opposition. And I would hope that eventually the Conservatives might see sense and come and join us.
Well, I mean, this has been Nigel Farage's very blunt stated ambition. He wants to be leader of the opposition. Does that give him a springboard to basically say, I should lead the opposition?
I think
come to me, or does he want to join the Conservatives and take over the party?
No, he won't join the Conservatives. I think that what he can say on the basis of that is that the people have voted in quite large numbers for his programme, which is not
politics, Kay. I've lost before. I've won 4 elections on the trot. I'm used to what defeat looks like, and I'm prepared for it. But I'm not. My political life is not over. I feel a bit like Tony Benn tonight, that I be leaving Parliament to spend more time on politics. I've got causes dear to my heart, such as autism, disability, justice, that I will be fighting for just as hard outside Parliament as I used to in Parliament. So I'm ready for whatever the electorate throw at me. And I treat victory and defeat like those two imposters just the same.
Bit of Kipling.
Paraphrase Kipling.
Yeah, indeed so, Beth.
And John, the party will be, if this is correct, reeling from this. It is a really terrible defeat. You've nearly lost 2/3 of your seats, if this is correct. How do you think the party can even begin to rebuild? What do you want to see come from this?
Well, I think there will need to be a reshaping, and there will need to be careful choice of personnel. We don't yet know who has lost their seat, so it's too early to speculate. I trust that Rishi Sunak wins his seat, and he will carry on for an interim period while the party thinks through what it would like to do next. There will need to be a new chairman of the
So, you know, if there's a cup of tea to be brewed, you've got plenty of time, because we're not expecting...
And if we're looking at a Labour majority here, I mean, the counting surely will be much quicker, would it not, Gideon?
It will still take. It will still take throughout the night, and we'll see the ones who want to really race and get that first constituency medal through. But we'll still be looking at that sort of 2 to 4 a.m. period when we'll get the bulk of it through.
But we will be wanting to see these early these early results, if they
days. But on our figures, we think Labour are on about 36%. 36%? Down a little bit on the polls. And
that is astonishing.
And the Conservatives on 26, so a gap between the two parties of maybe around about 10%.
For people who were trying to run the country.
Indeed we did, but I have to say, if we had not resisted the deal over which I resigned from the government, I'm quite sure the Conservative Party would have split sooner, and we would have lost power to Jeremy Corbyn, which I don't think even Peter would have welcomed. So I'm not sorry that we did that. I think it would have been an absolute catastrophe, whereas this is likely, from a Conservative point of view, I think this creates a very bad situation. I mean, obviously, I'd be in the Labour Party if I thought the Labour Party was a good thing. I think this will create a bad situation for the country, but one from which we can recover. But that wouldn't have been the case if Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell had taken power. But, you know, I'm very conscious if 241 Conservative MPs lose their seats, it's going to be a very, very painful time for them, for their families, for their staff, for the Conservative Party. And obviously, all of us are very worried about the future of the country under a Labour government, even, of course, Peter's entitled to relish it. OK, highly unlikely that Rishi Sunak can stay on as leader if all this comes to pass. And if he does go, you're going to run, aren't you? I don't want to get into that tonight. This story only emerged because there was a recording of a private speech that I gave, and so as a result, it ended up in the press. But
you did not say it.
What's said is said, but what the situation for me is that I've got a great deal of respect for Rishi Sunak. I think he's a man with a brilliant mind, a great heart for our country. D-Day, announcing this thing in the rain. But, you know, when that happened, Sky TV. I understand from my own...
exit poll is correct, then that is a terrible night for the SNP. One thing just to say, though, the exit poll is less accurate in Scotland. We are more worried about variation there, so we really will count that through the night very, very carefully.
We've already had both myself and George referencing that if the Tories end up with a number of seats that the exit poll is predicting, you know, we're back to the 1830s, which is probably something at the start of the year we didn't necessarily think we'd be discussing. We've talked a lot about which cabinet ministers might be under threat. Can we have a look at who is particularly...
Bring this up, just huge caveat on this. I told you, individual seats we're going to be careful about. These are the people who will be nervous. The exit polls suggest they're going to go, but we don't know until those results come in. So this was the cabinet. Up top left, Alex Chalk, he was always worried. Godalming, that will suggest, the exit poll is suggesting
to end up with that result. And I think the first one would be the overwhelming desire to get rid of the Tories. I think that definitely went against the SNP's campaign. Second of all, I think the SNP in itself has clearly been riddled with scandals and infighting over the last few while, which has undoubtedly damaged the party. But the third factor is definitely going to be turnout. I'll be interested to hear what the turnout was, not just because we now have more barriers in this election with having to have ID, the fact that everyone's uninspired, the postal votes fiasco, but also today I've learned it was raining up in Scotland, which also always has a negative impact on the SNP.
Is this existential at this level for the SNP, or do you think, well, actually, we've got 2 years before the next Scottish election?
Well, I think that's going to be a question that the SNP is going to have to wrestle with, because undoubtedly the party has to go away and have a reflection on what's gone wrong and try and rebuild and reconnect with people. The question will be, is it sensible to drag on for another 2 years until the Scottish election, or is it the kind of result where we just want to rip the Band-Aid off? So I think time will tell once we see what the end result is.
Yeah, as soon as we have some of those first seats in from Scotland, we'll be able to see whether the SNP has been losing just to Labour, which was, I guess, what we might have expected, or whether they've also been losing seats to the Conservatives there, as then there is some sense of that. But to Rory and Alistair, let's talk first of all, just picking up from where Vince left off. The bungee jump strategy has worked, right? I mean, 11 seats to 60.
To my total horror. I mean, for those, I mean, I don't think anybody's missed it.
As a bungee jumper?
Yeah, as a bungee jumper, yeah. No, I mean, I thought it was very sad, in a way, that the Lib Dems didn't really...
Well, nothing from the Prime Minister, as he still is right now. We're outside his house. We've got a car, actually, that's just left the grounds of the house. It's been so quiet here this evening. No cars going in or out. All we could hear all evening were the sound of the wood pigeons. We could smell the cows in the field next door. The curtains are closed. As far as we can see, the shutters are closed. But the Prime Minister is inside and no doubt absorbing the news of that exit poll. And if it's accurate or near accurate, he will be contemplating the comprehensive defeat, the the brutal battering that he has led his party to. We're expecting to hear from him in the early hours of the morning, about 3:30 to 4 o'clock. That will be the first time.
Matter. I thought he did the best election broadcast, the one with his son. So I think the kind of personal and the quite slightly comic is what got him more notice.
We're waiting to see the correlation with water and sewage in the seats that we think the Lib Dems have got, right? I mean, that's what, you know.
Entirely possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's also fascinating how in this campaign, and I think it's symbolised slightly by the water park stuff, how so many big issues were not discussed at all. I mean, we never really got into serious issues about the economy. We never really got into serious issues about Europe. We never really got into serious issues about adult social care from any of them. So there is a sense in which one party was sort of carrying a Ming vase across the floor. Another party was trying to destroy itself by doing weird, which the Conservative Party, which should never called the election in the first place. And the Lib Dems were on their water slides. But where was the policy debate?
Well, what should they have talked about? What should you have
But one of the other problems...
Prifennydd Cymru yng Nghabinet Rishi Sunak. Mae yn ffigwr adnabyddus iawn wrth gwrs yng Ngwleidyddiaeth Cymru ac wedi bod yn cynrychioli'r ardal yma am bron i 20 mlynedd. I fwyafrif tro diwetha oedd bron i 10,000 o bleidleisiau o ystyried y ffiniau newydd, bron 11,000, ond i ni'n clywed bod David T.C. Davies yn cydnabod yn gyhoeddus erbyn hyn na fydd e'n aelod senedol erbyn bore fory. Dim syndod felly fod llafur wedi bod yn targedu a llygadu'r etholaeth yma ers y dechrau. Keir Starmer yma yn ystod yr wythnos gyntaf yr ymgyrch lan yr hewl yn y fenni. Mwyn cipio'r sedd fydd yn rhaid i'r ymgeisydd llafur Catherine Fuchs gyflawni gogwydd o tua 10%, ond mae hwnna'n edrych yn realistig iawn erbyn hyn. Un peth arall fydd yn ddiddorol, gweld pa mor llwyddiannus fydd plaid reform, a fydden nhw'n drydydd yn yr etholaeth hon gan wthio y democratiaid rhyddfrydol yn bedwerydd. Felly dyna y sefyllfa yma yn Sir Fynwy. Beth am y sefyllfa nawr, ochr arall y wlad gyda Liam yn Llangefni?
Ia, noswaith dda, chroeso at ni yma ar Ynys Môn. Ac os da chi eisiau un ystadegyn sy'n dangos pa mor agos alle hi fod yma heno, wel,
Kirsty Walk, who's at the BBC's headquarters at Pacific Quay up there in Glasgow. Hi there, Kirsty.
Hello there, and with me I have Angus Robertson, who is the Cabinet Secretary of the Scottish Government, and the former SNP Westminster leader, and Ian Murray, the MP for Edinburgh South so far, and the shadow Scottish Secretary. That might change after tonight. It's worth saying that we have got on the exit poll 10 seats for the SNP, but we're not extrapolating. I think the parties are extrapolating, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the BBC is not extrapolating. But first of all, Ian Murray, if this exit poll is anyway true, we could be sitting with the new Secretary of State for Scotland.
Well, let's underline in bold if. But what we've seen over the last 6 weeks of this election campaign is a Change Labour Party offering change to the public, and the public, I hope, have responded to that. And if the exit poll turns out to be correct, and it is just a poll, but it does chime with what we've seen in the other polls in recent days and in recent weeks, and therefore that's the kind of thing we've been getting back on the doorstep. But we used to be very, very cautious because a lot of these seats, of course, were very, very big SNP majorities, and therefore they could all be very, very tight indeed. And look, we're coming from the worst election results since 1935, and therefore the hill is steep to climb. And it looks as if we're climbing some of it tonight, but let's not get too carried away this early in the night.
This is a very Starmer-esque reaction. No whooping, no jumping up and down.
Well, you know, we've always been confident but not complacent, and we won't be complacent until such times as all those votes are counted and they're in the bag.
Angus Robertson, there's no extrapolation for the SNP. The SNP is just a, obviously, Scottish party, and you have gone, if this is correct, you've lost 35 seats. Now, the former leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, tonight says this is the grimmer end of expectations, expects the exit poll to be profoundly right. What's your response to the exit poll?
Well, obviously, I'm disappointed, and congratulations to Ian and colleagues. I think it's in line with recent
about the opportunities that he now has as a historically successful Prime Minister, but he'll also be really nervous about the responsibilities that confront him.
George and Ed, what did you feel when you walked in through the door for the first time?
I suspect he's actually feeling a lot of relief. I mean, I certainly felt, I know David Cameron felt in 2010, that we had delivered for all of our supporters. There's an enormous sense of, thank God we did it. And even though he's been told for weeks he's going to win, I think there's something special about seeing the exit poll and kind of knowing it's happening. And I think also, I think for Labour, but Ed will speak to this as well, from the depths of 5 years ago and Jeremy Corbyn, when people were saying there'd never be another Labour government, for the moderates in the Labour Party to have carried the torch to this point, is, I think, a lesson for the Conservatives, because I think fundamentally Rishi Sunak did not, unlike Keir Starmer, confront the extremists and the demons in his party. Keir Starmer did. Jeremy Corbyn was expelled from being a candidate, and he's won. Rishi Sunak never confronted the Boris Johnson period of government and the lack of ethics in it, and he never confronted the Liz Truss period in government and the economic madness of that. And he has paid a huge price. He turned out not to be the change that the country wanted because he was too timid, he was not bold enough, he played it safe, he tried to manage the party. And in the end, it kind of drifted from being a party of aspiration that won 14 years ago to a sort of party of anger. And now it's on the receiving end of the country's anger.
Do you know what this night feels like? Because in 97, you literally walked in with a majority, not just, in fact, slightly larger if the exit poll is right, but not by much.
If you want to sit there all night and talk rubbish and parrot away, it's probably
absolutely.
a last show on television.
I'll hold my hands
Can
up
I finish the point about the Lords?
The Lords with Labour peers.
So Labour, to get anything done, are going to have to get stuff through the Lords. That's our system. What I hope is that people do as Harriet says she's going to do, to get in there, and Lords reform is part of what a Labour government does.
Rory. Can I just come back? I think Christians just takes off this argument. And incidentally, many congratulations, Harriet. I think it's a really great appointment.
Congratulations.
Amazing. And actually, I think it's a very, very good honours list if you look at it. They're very good Conservatives, good Labour appointments. You should be very proud. I don't think this is about packing the House of Lords. I think you deserve it completely, and I'm very proud of that. But the big point is this. This is a staggering majority if this happens. I mean, people just put it in context, far bigger than anything that Boris Johnson had or Theresa May had or David Cameron had. It's basically, we haven't seen anything like this since 1997. And this means that Keir Starmer kind of has immense power. This is like an elected dictatorship. And the question is, what's he going to do with it? Because when the Liberals took a landslide like this in 1906, they changed the whole of Britain. They invented basically the welfare state.
45. I mean, Labour, to be fair, I mean, I don't agree with everything they did, but in 45 they transformed Britain.
So this is the question. If you're given that amount of power, what are you going to do with it? And that's where I think Christian's right, because we don't really know.
Is it a Labour thing that they don't win, and then when they do, these majorities are sort of oversized almost?
I think there's something else going on here, which is part of our modern political setting. There is and you actually see it across the world a bit, tidal waves against incumbency. And Labour are the incumbents next, so wait for your tidal wave.
That's why I don't think it'll be as...
And it does feel a bit like that, voters are like sort of freight that isn't tethered on the top of a ship, and they sort of move from one end to the other a bit quicker. By the way, we're trying to sort of look through the... Kwasi's irritated that we were looking at the polls all the time in the last election. We'll take the point, but just looking at the next election, it's very interesting. If you look at what the exit poll is saying, if you drill down into it and look at what they're saying in London, for instance, Labour's down a bit. Down. Those numbers, but down. And that suggests that people are looking elsewhere. We presume people on the left, it could be Muslim voters who are unhappy with Labour, but actually down. Not much, but down. And that's
I think there's something to be said about Labour's campaign. They have been incredibly efficient in where they have gone, where they put resources in the campaign.
Parties, including Northern Ireland, 19th. So those are the numbers. I realise it's quite hard to take in all that information. Also, there are lots of caveats around some of those numbers because a shift or two in either direction could change particularly the seat numbers around the SNP and Reform. That's what we're being told by our team. And we'll talk to Professor John Curtis as well, who, along with the rest of his team, has come up with that exit poll in a couple of minutes' time. Let's now, as we hop around the country, go to Ed Davies' constituency. Nick Watt is in Kingston and Suburbiton in southwest London. Hi, Nick.
Hello there, I'm in Chessington. You'll be very pleased to hear that I'm at a safe distance from the zoo. Got to be careful at zoos at this time of night. And yes, I'm at the Kingston and Surbiton count, the seat that Ed Davey has held since 2017.
They must be pretty happy there at the moment, are they, Nick?
That's right. So, look, we're not going to be seeing Ed Davey for a few hours. We think his result is sort of sometime between 3 and 4 a.m. But we have heard from Ed Davey, and Ed Davey is saying that if this exit poll is right, then the Liberal Democrats' view is this is their best result, they're saying, since 1923. Because what they're saying is if they got 29 gains, because they won 8 seats last time, 29 gains, that would be their best result in 101 years. This exit poll, if it's right, would suggest that they have absolutely smashed that. And what the Liberal Democrats are saying is that they believe that his very personal campaign, all that paddleboarding, going down that slide, they called that the air war, the national campaign. They think that worked really well. Their initial strategy, the classic Liberal Democrat strategy, was to have a ground campaign, because that's where they do well, and they wanted to make sure that the national campaign sort of didn't interrupt that. What they found was all the attention that Ed Davey got meant that that air war, that national campaign...
seats, the colours on the map are changing. Let's have a look at seats 151 to 200. Where will the Conservatives start to mount a defence in England? Again, Telford Labour, South Devon Lib Dem. Let's have a look. Frome and East Sussex Lib Dem. Lib Dem's doing brilliantly. Labour doing brilliantly. Beaconsfield, there we are. The Conservatives seem to have defended Beaconsfield, but that's heartland Conservative country. Bassett Law, Reform from the Conservatives. Tunbridge Wells, Bicester, Chelmsford. You're starting to see the Conservatives defend a seat here and there, but this is around about 180th, 190th target seats. Welling, Hatfield, Grant Shapps. Looks as though that one's gone under our prediction as well. Let's see the next board, shall we? Now we're 201 to 250. And again, even seats that are 200 down the target list, Labour are taking. Rochester and Strood, Isle of Wight West. Yes, some are being defended. Melstride back in central Devon, says our prediction. But look, they're taking Lowestoft. Gravesham is interesting. 199th on Labour's target seat list, and we've got them down as a Labour gain. Kettering, Mansfield, Wellingborough, Labour gains still in the majority on this board. You're seeing the Conservatives can't defend their own seats until you get to seat 251, right? So we're way down. We're in safe Tory territory now. Salisbury, Reigate, Tewkesbury, Cambridgeshire, North West, Beverley, Windsor. Even here, Labour are taking seats. Staffordshire Moorlands, Sutton Coldfield, Amber Valley, Herne Bay, Old Bexley, Broxbourne, Chatham, Solihull West. Even here, in their safest seats. Great Yarmouth was the seat of Brandon Lewis, the former Justice and Northern Ireland Secretary who stood there. That's gone under our prediction. So it is a horrible, horrible night for the Conservatives. Finally, here we are. And they mop their brows. Seat 300. And look, at last, the Conservatives are starting to mount a defence, but only in their safest seats. And even then, you've got Labour taking Cannock Chase, which had a huge Tory majority. So the whole map is changing tonight. It's just an extraordinary prediction we've got here.
Jeremy, thank you. Truly a roll call of disaster as you see the names of all those constituencies spin through. We'll be back with Jeremy throughout the night as the real numbers start to come in.
Yeah, we talked to Victoria Derbyshire outside Rishi Sunak's home in Richmond in Yorkshire. The lights weren't on. It looked pretty quiet.
The car left.
But he is tweeting. He is tweeting, and he's put this out to the hundreds of Conservative candidates, thousands of volunteers and millions of voters. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your support, and thank you for your vote.
Keir Starmer has also begun to have his say. To everyone who's campaigned for Labour in this election, to everyone who voted for us and put their trust in our changed Labour Party, one of his favourite phrases, thank you. So neither man either conceding or claiming victory at this stage of the night. You wouldn't expect them to do any less, but they both are there with a message to their supporters. And when eventually we get their counts at various times through the night, we will hear from them directly on the stage.
Yeah, their count's likely to be later on in the evening. We're looking for the first count.
We are.
We need the first count. And we're hoping that it's going to be One of these counts. Naga in Blythe and Sally, who is joining us as well from Sunderland South. Now, Naga, first of all, how's it looking there?
Hey, evening. It's looking really, really busy. A record's already been broken. I was here in 2019 and it took 38 seconds for the first ballot box to come in. It took 30 seconds today. It's a more streamlined operation here, I will say, but as it's been so strenuously pressed upon us, accuracy is key, not speed. I know you've seen the pictures of outside this leisure centre here in Blythe of cars coming in and people running in with boxes, but this is a really, really streamlined operation. There are 18 teams counting. They are prioritising the first constituency. There are 4 here, Blythe and Ashington. So that will be the first to be declared. And about 15 minutes ago, we were told, look, expect that in around an hour. But, you know, a little bit vague there because the expectation is that could come in at around 11:30, but it may be sooner, you never know. I know we're all waiting for the first results. 4 constituencies here, all new because of boundary changes: Blythe and Ashington, Cramlington and Killingworth, Hexham and Northumberland North. So the secret, what is the secret apart from the running that you are seeing? Well, the secret is lots of people, very little downtime to keep the operation streamlined, but accuracy is key. I've also managed to steal off one of the tables. I don't know if you can see, you might be able to see on the tables, a little thimble, because I'm seeing the lightweight paper that's being used. That is very much part of the key as well. I'll tell you a little story. The man who masterminded this operation in 2019 was Bill Crawford, and he'd been poached from Sunderland, where Sally is obviously, and he'd worked at Newcastle in previous years. And now his son, Mark Crawford, is masterminding the operation here. So we'll see if success.
Of course, one of the reasons that Reform UK can make such advances in this election is because they're now standing everywhere, whereas the predecessor party, the Brexit Party, didn't stand everywhere. They didn't contest Conservative races in 2019. So that seems to be one of the most significant things. I think it's also significant that if you looked at the polls in the last week, we did actually see a drop in Labour's kind of potential vote intention of around 5 points. And so it
to the Greens, who are hoping to unseat Shadow Culture Secretary Thangam Debonair? And can George Galloway take Rochdale, which he, of course, won in a by-election in February? And finally, in Islington North, Labour's former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is now standing as an independent after being suspended from the party in 2020. My goodness me, it's going to be a busy night.
Anna, thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, we can now hear from Angela Rayner, the Labour Deputy Leader, who joins us from Ashton-under-Lyne. Good evening. Is this what you thought? Does this tally with what you were expecting? A majority of 170?
Well, the exit poll is incredibly encouraging, and I think it shows that Keir's done a tremendous job of transforming the Labour Party and putting forward a programme for government that people can get behind after the 14 years of the chaos and decline under the Tories. They're getting their, you know, the jury's out on them, and I think they're going to, you know, have a very difficult night because they've took the voters for granted. They've, you know, cost of living has gone up, people feel worse off, and they see that Labour is a changed Labour Party that can deliver a programme for government that will make the change that people desperately want to see.
Right, but you've got this enormous majority without, in truth, telling us a huge amount about what you're going to do with it. So what are you going to do with it?
Well, first of all, we haven't got a tremendous majority yet because we haven't had a single result in, but the exit poll is encouraging, and we want a programme for government that we can put forward our first steps, which is getting our NHS back on track, getting our economy back on track. As Rachel says, stability is change, and making sure we can grow the economy to pay for our public services, the New Deal for working people, the 1.5 million homes we desperately need in the UK. These are all programmes for government that we think people have really got behind because they can see the decline in our public services, the Liz Truss crashing of the economy, the cost of living going up, and they see that we've got a programme to change that.
Andrew, it sounds like you've got probably a cold at the end of an incredibly gruelling 6 weeks. Can I just ask you, and I know, of course, it is exit poll territory at the moment, but if they are right and Reform returns 13 new MPs to Parliament, what does that do?
Well, I think Reform is a product of the 14 years of the Tory failure. And apologies for the sound, it's not a cold, we've been in the rain, it's just stopped, so I think the equipment's just about giving up on us. So I apologise if there's a problem with the sound, but I think that Reforms, you know, if they do better than expected tonight, it's because of the Tories have monumentously failed.
Hang about, week after week. Your spokespeople, Stephen Flynn, your Westminster leader, Swinney last week, said exactly what Ruth Davidson has just said, that if they get a majority, then that is a mandate for a second independent referendum. If the exit poll is right, you're not even near, you're barely in a minority. Wouldn't it be graceful now to say, actually, the Scottish people have spoken, that is not what they're interested in. What they're really interested in is good governance. Shouldn't you now actually live by your own words?
I think good governance is what every government of any colour in any parliament should strive for. I wouldn't disagree with you about that at all. The other thing, though, where I think we might differ is the job of the Scottish National Party is to campaign for independence, to make the cogent and compelling case for Scottish independence, and we'll continue to do that.
After week,
if you
lose in this vote, you won't pursue it. And now you're still pursuing it.
Sorry, I don't think anyone said we wouldn't pursue it. We need to make a more cogent and more compelling case. But I think by the same token, pundits need to understand the compelling motive.
Consternation within the party. The SNP will be hoping that the controversy will help them to get the 2.6% swing needed to win that seat. We shall see, because it is just the beginning of a very long night. We are expecting the first UK results from either Sunderland or Newcastle at around 11:30. The first Scottish result, as my colleague Laura Goodwin said, will probably be from Rutherglen at around 1:30 in the morning. The bulk of the results will come between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m, so you should know by breakfast time whether that exit poll is correct and whether Sir Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister. Now, we are also going to be keeping across social media for you throughout the course of the night to bring you the lighter side of election night. Now, dogs at polling stations has become a bit of a thing in recent years. It even has its own hashtag. So, in no particular order, we have Ben in Kilbarchan, and we have it on good authority that he is a Romanian rescue. And it has clearly all been a little bit too much for this guy in Edinburgh. And finally, we have Tilly in Aberdeen, who's looking very proud there of however she has voted. Don't say we're not good to you, Martin.
Yeah, Tilly gets it for me, I think, on balance, Laura, but we'll see more of them through the night. Yeah, all those stories Laura was talking about to play out in the next 7 or 8 hours. There is drama, there are futures on the line, there is, if the exit poll is right, a new government to be formed, all of that. And there will be pictures aplenty that will make memories through the night as well. I think the first picture probably we've seen already that is worth logging is that shot of Rishi Sunak's house. Silence, darkness, curtains drawn. I don't know what we expected down there, but every picture tells a story, doesn't it? And that atmosphere seems to sum up certainly what the exit poll is projecting on that. Ailsa Henderson, whenever we mention the exit poll, we caveat it, and it's not without good reason. I mean, look, the broadcasters broadcasting out of London tonight, the UK story, will say the story is done, that's it. It's just a question of numbers. But in Scotland, very different, and that caveat's really acute here. Would just explain to us why it is so heavily caveated, particularly in Scotland?
Sure. Well, the exit poll it's based on a sample of polling areas, and there's only 133 that they use across Britain, and of those, 18.
The national picture is looking great, but closer to home, they say they're optimistic, but very, very cautious too. The Conservative camp didn't really want to be drawn and speak to me at that moment. Plenty of smiles, though. Or was it a grimace I'm not so sure. Well, this seat was held in 2019 by the Conservatives, the old Aberconwy seat, a majority of just over 2,000. But as we've been hearing tonight, things have changed, boundaries have changed, a new constituency name. So Aberconwy has grown. It's taken a chunk of the old Arfon constituency, Bangor with its 10,000 students, a chunk of Clwyd West too. And if the 2019 contest had been fought on these new boundaries, well, the Tory majority of 2,000 will be shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and we're looking at a nominal majority of 749. Plaid Cymru also have hopes of making an impact here. Their candidate urging people today to vote with their hearts. The argument going
right across the UK. We are generally behind. We had the lowest turnout across the UK in 2010, 2015, 2017 and 2019. And it's looking a bit like we could be following that in 2024.
It wasn't a bad day today either, David, was it? It was windy, but it
Yeah.
wasn't too rainy. It shouldn't have kept people at home, but people are on their summer holidays.
Yes, and that is a big difference between us and England. And again, Rishi Sunak didn't really take that into account. And that does show in the postal vote figures. So 25,571 postal votes were issued. That was up from just under 17,000 last time. I did a wee bit of digging from 2019. And
Town Hall here in Grimsby, and we've got a really interesting fight on our hands. It is a seat that you would look at that exit poll, you'd look at the Labour landslide and think it's very likely to go back to Labour. This is a new constituency. It's the merging of two towns into one constituency. Grimsby, which has always traditionally been Labour, went Tory in 2019, and Cleethorpes, which has always, or generally, has been more Conservative leaning. So those two towns coming together will give an indicator of where the country's at, and we've seen from the exit poll where the pollsters think the country is at. And the most likely outcome is that Labour take this seat tonight, which would mean Melanie On, who used to be the MP for Grimsby, getting her old job back, or a new constituency, but effectively her old job. But we've seen that the reform predictions are really buoying the candidates and the activists down in the hall here who are marshalling the tables here, looking at all the votes. I can see the reform candidate just down there. He's a young guy, used to be a Tory councillor. He switched allegiances to reform. And what we've seen out and about in Grimsby and Cleethorpes throughout this year is that, yes, there's a huge hunger for change. Is there a great appetite for what Labour have been offering with Keir Starmer? I'd say it's a muted appetite, really. People want change. Do they really want what's on offer? Is there a great feeling of euphoria here? No, there isn't. And there has been this idea of protest votes, kind of a real statement from people just fed up with the whole political system, how it feels like it's let people down so badly over the last few years.
Well, the exit poll is saying that Grimsby and Cleethorpes is a likely Labour gain, but as you said, that exit poll also showing a reform likely to gain 13 seats. Could it be an upset here within one of them? The exit poll saying that it's likely to turn Labour here later on tonight. We're expecting a result at around 3 o'clock in the morning. Kate, we'll speak to you later.
OK, lovely. Thanks very much indeed. I'm not going to ask you anything because you've got a mouthful of food. Already, she's got the Cracker Barrel out, haven't you?
Yeah, gone early.
Yeah.
Cheese and crackers, yeah, done it.
Exactly. So, the exit poll, well, the man, I was going to give you a few more facts, but the man who knows everything there is to know about it
Not true.
is here.
I mean, it was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I heard I was in the cab and I could hear the reaction on the desk when the kind of the numbers came through. But we were going through those numbers for a while, and also kind of looking at some of the charts and the historical context. So can I start with
Please.
some charts? Is that all right?
Oh, I love
is that
a chart.
allowed?
You just
There are many.
How far back are you going?
There are many. But here's the thing. OK, shall we start with some of the constituency stories that we're hearing about? You know, we were wondering about who the big scalps might potentially be implied by the exit poll. And one of them is, of course, let's bring it up, actually, Jeremy Hunt. And one of them is Jeremy Hunt. Yeah, there you can see him there. And if I just bring up some of the statistics, we'll stick on Jeremy Hunt because we're going to bring up those statistics of what is implied by the exit poll in his constituency of Godalming and Ash. You can see it just down there. OK, so this is last time around. 53% share of the vote for Jeremy Hunt. 53%. Remember that number? And now look here. 32% is implied by the exit poll. Now, this is, they say, a possible Lib Dem gain, OK? But it's actually a bit closer than a lot of people would have expected, looking like 37% for the Lib Dems. So looking quite plausible that we will, tonight, in the next few hours, witness history in terms of the Chancellor, a sitting Chancellor losing their seat. But let's just see, OK? Because what we're going to do is we're going to look through each of the results as they come through and give you a sense of whether it's kind of above, below, in line with the exit poll. And that's going to be one to watch, although that's coming up later. And Portsmouth North as well. Can we find Penny Mordaunt? So Penny Mordaunt as well, facing a real challenge in Portsmouth North. There she is, down south in Portsmouth North. And what you can see here is really kind of interesting, because this is even closer, OK? So last time around, 61% Conservative vote in Portsmouth North. 61%. Look at the blue. And now look in the exit poll, 28%. Just look at the complete collapse that you're talking about in many constituencies around the country, although in this case, it's a bit too close to call, OK? And you've got different dynamics going on that we can talk about. You know, there's the Brexit vote, it's different areas with mortgages, a lot of people with mortgages, kind of those areas with more people with mortgages tending to vote against the government. So you've got the reversion from what we saw the last election with that Brexit vote, but you've also got a mortgage story happening post-Liz Truss. Is it the kind of Liz Truss hangover? But I just want to, I mentioned a few charts to you, and I want to just show you this one, OK? This is a bit of a historic one, OK? We'll start with what the exit poll is suggesting here. Conservative seats, 131. And now this line goes back a long way. I want to just follow that line through the 90s, the 70s, the 50s, the 20s, through into the...
October 2022, when the Truss mini-budget and the Conservatives lost their reputation for economic competence, then the degree to which that's manifested itself tonight is, of course, a set of, quite recent factors. So you have to have those moments in politics where people look up, stand, have a look at the parties and really rethink what they want to do. And we've seen this very consistently in opinion polls. This anti-Conservative sentiment was very, very strong. And also this sense of not necessarily having a lot of confidence that Labour would be much better to handle these issues. So hence, in that kind of vacuum, the disillusionment sets in, the rise of a party like Reform can take hold. I'm not particularly convinced that if the Conservatives had held an election later in the year, Reform couldn't have even done better.
Well, you've got to be very careful about this. I totally agree with Rob about this idea of the red wall, and that, there was this red wall of Labour seats, but there was an aberration when, because of Brexit or because of Jeremy Corbyn, the red wall didn't vote for Labour in 2019, but it's now come back to Labour, and that's all OK. It's like reversing to normal. Actually, under Brexit, under Corbyn, was this sense of discontent that they haven't delivered in my living standards, in my community, in housing, in my life. And that discontent has not gone. And it's actually now hit the Conservatives. I'm discontented because of the cost of living crisis. I'm waiting for the NHS. And that has shifted those votes to Labour. But if you're a Labour MP in the red wall, you're thinking to yourself, if we don't deliver in this Parliament, those people could switch again.
And there's one aspect of the
caffeination, if that's actually a word here at the moment, because we are expecting this to be a bit of a long night. The result here for Rishi Sunak's constituency, Richmond and Northallerton in North Yorkshire, not expected until around 4 o'clock in the morning. So we've got a way ahead of us yet. But the upside of that timing is that by then we should have a pretty good idea of whether those exit poll predictions are correct, how accurate they are, the scale of the Labour win that's predicted, and, of course, the scale of defeat for Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party. Now, this does mean that we will be seeing Rishi Sunak here later on. I would imagine he's not going to get here with a lot of time to go before the result is declared. He's not going to want to hang around, is he? Let's be honest. But when he does arrive, clearly all eyes will be on him. The question I've been asked time and time again in the run-up to tonight is, will Rishi Sunak lose his seat? In all honesty, just the fact that that question is being asked is astonishing, because this constituency, well, it was frankly not even a question in previous elections. It was about as safe a Tory seat as it gets. Also, there's the fact that never before has a sitting Prime Minister lost their seat in a general election. The exit polls say that a Conservative win, a Rishi Sunak win here is likely. But I'd say there's just enough doubt there that this is going to be gripping here.
Thanks, Claire. Before we move on, look, Mr. Taylor McKnight on Twitter X has sent me a message saying, can someone at Channel 4 News please tell Chris GM that Houghton is pronounced Houghton rather than Houghton? We had a long debate about it here. I mean, if you want to help us...
the 9 o'clock hour, didn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, because I come from Lancashire where we had a Houghton. So, you know, there's three ways. Let us know what's right.
We are going to go to Hannah right now, who's with our very patient audience. Everyone there has got a different story to tell about how they voted and why they're here tonight.
Yes, they certainly do. And I'm joined here by the Hillman family, who have all voted in different ways, as I understand. How did you vote?
Conservative.
Reform. Labour.
This must lead to some interesting conversations around the dinner table. OK, so do you always vote Conservative?
No. I have switched over the years. The reason I voted Conservative this year was I just wasn't that impressed with any of the main leaders. So I just looked locally at who was representing us, and we had a really proactive, good local constituency MP or candidate, Lucy Demery, so I voted for her.
Fantastic. And for reform, were you dead set on reform from the beginning, or were you wavering?
Oh, not at all. I actually wanted a Labour majority, and I'm glad to see it come through. But from looking at the polling, I felt like that was almost a foregone conclusion, and that my vote would be better used choosing who I wanted to be in opposition. And I feel like Nigel Farage's direct, no-nonsense attitude makes him quite good in that role, if not government.
Voting for the opposite. We've got a game theorist in, I think. All right, let's come over here. Thank you to all of you. OK, how did you vote?
Conservative.
Are you Welsh?
Just a bit, yeah.
So a Welsh Tory we have.
Yeah.
A rare beast.
Very rare.
And why so? Why did you vote Tory?
I usually vote Conservative. On this occasion, I don't like what Rishi did to Boris. And then to you. But I didn't hear anything new from Starmer. He talks about change a lot, but he doesn't go into any detail about policy or anything. So for me, I just voted Conservative.
How about you?
I vote Lib Dem.
Yeah? Do you always vote Lib Dem?
Yeah, so in my part of London, it's normally Lib Dem or Tory. But I actually really liked what the Lib Dem stand for. You know, Ed Davey, you know, there's a lot about social care. There's a lot about, you know, they want to put local people on the board of water companies. So, yeah, I like the Lib Dems.
And we have another reform voter over here, Amy.
Hi. So originally I was meant to be Labour, and then very last minute I switched to Reform.
That's very interesting. Now, 2 Labour voters, though, who switched to Reform at the last minute. What was your reasoning?
Mainly what Keir Starmer, the elderly, what he wanted to do with them, and the hiring a tax for people who are trying to work harder to better themselves.
OK, so it was almost like a against Labour decision rather than necessarily a pro-reform. OK, well, let's come over here as well, because we've got 2 best friends over here who, I mean, I would say don't necessarily see eye to eye politically. Is that a fair statement to say?
Yeah, I think we come from very different parts of the political spectrum.
Tell me the story.
Yes, I mean, we're sort of best friends from university, and even at those sort of times, we'd be sort of back and forth, like squabbling and bickering, I guess, over time. But yeah, as in, we're still best friends. We know there's a common denominator of that, but we are always voting sort of opposite to each other. But that, you know, that raises good sort of points and arguments between us.
So which way round are you? And does this lead to a lot of drunken arguments at sort of 2 a.m. between you?
It's all very jovial, really. I think we can see each other's perspectives most of the time.
Which way round are you?
So I voted Labour.
Labour and
I voted Conservative.
Conservative.
Yeah.
And is that, are you kind of stuck? You always vote for Labour?
Most of the time. I'm in a very marginal constituency where there's a few hundred votes between Labour and Tories. So.
And Conservatives, was that an easy choice for you?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of flip as well sometimes, but like the lady said over there, my local sort of representative is a Labour constituency.
Just after midnight, and that is down in Basildon and Billericay to the south of where I am, a really controversial constituency.
One of the days where Labour Party leaders make excuses for poor results and pretend that, defeat is really a victory, like in 2017, where you'd almost have thought it was just benevolence that led to Theresa May going back into Downing Street because we didn't want a forced eviction on our hands. You know, we lost in 2017, we lost in 2019, we lost in 2015 and 2010 for that matter. We are in this position today to be able to win a general election because the Labour Party has fundamentally changed. We understood why we lost in 2019, listened, and I mean genuinely listened, as to why we lost support from people we should have never broken faith with. And as well as rebuilding trust with those voters, we also built a big tent that enabled millions of disaffected Conservative voters to look at Labour and think, well, I might vote for these guys, and we'll soon find out how many of them actually did. But this is a remarkable exit poll. They're not results, it's an exit poll. But in 2019, we were on the brink of extinction and told that in order to get a majority of one, we would need a 1997-style swing. This exit poll shows a 1997-style majority. So, well, you know, I'll believe it when I see it. But this is a remarkable exit poll and a testament to the change that Keir Starmer has led in the Labour Party. I don't think that guy's had nearly enough credit for the steel, the determination that he has shown to really grab the Labour Party by the scruff of it.
Wes, I wonder if I can
force it to learn why we lost.
I wonder if I can just jump in. I mean, nobody's taking away from you the things that you are saying again based on the exit poll, but these figures do suggest not a resounding enthusiasm for the party in those seats that voted for you 5 years ago.
We'll wait and see what the results said, but I think I've said on the BBC before, I think it was on another election night, that Keir Starmer could literally be on his way to Buckingham Palace to be made Prime Minister, and pundits would be saying, oh, it's still a disappointing night for Labour. I mean, come on, give me a break. I've had enough of this now after 4 years. 4 years ago, I don't mind saying, I would never have imagined that Labour could do this in one term. Never have imagined it. I thought it was impossible. I thought at best a two-term project. And yes, the implosion of the Conservatives and the SNP has put wind in Labour's sails. But the only reason we've got sails on the ship, and the ship is ship-shape, is because Keir Starmer took the vessel from the shipwreck in 2019, rebuilt it, and made it ship-shape and seaworthy again.
And Wes, just as you've been speaking there, Wes Streeting, you seem to have a little bit of a flicker of a bit more excitement about what happened rather than your early message of, oh, this is an exit poll. Are you ready to say you're sure you've won?
Well, I used to watch the 97 results back and thought that the Labour spokespeople who were on then sounded...
And the same mixture occurs on this occasion. Governments lose and the opposition makes its contribution by being credible and gaining ground. But this is even more graphic, even more of an assertion of the public will that they will not put up with misconduct in government. Mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, but not misconduct.
Are nights like this a little bit bittersweet for you? I mean, 92 was a totally different thing, was much closer, you know, the world was different. There's not much point in making a comparison.
Different age.
Different age, sure. But do you watch a Labour leader about to walk into Downing Street? Is there just a tiny bit of you that at some point in the night thinks, could have been me?
Well, last time round, when Tony and Cherie walked through that door, it wouldn't have been human of me not to have reflected for a millisecond, God damn, that could have been me and Glenn. But this time, I'm now ancient.
Do you win them back?
Well, I think that they have fermented discontent on things like housing and the health service. And what they do is they...
The game for you in terms of how you think reform might influence the future of Conservative politics in this country?
Yes, I do. I think it caught the Prime Minister. I mean, the Prime Minister was trying to swat us away like we were an angry fly, and he thought that actually if he attacked us the whole time, then we would disappear and not get any seats at all. But actually quite the reverse has happened.
bad night. So this is likely to be a battle between the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party. You will see, eagle-eyed viewers, there was just one Labour seat in Scotland in 2019. I expect that to change dramatically. And depending on how big the victory is for the Labour Party, it'll all be about the South and South West, the so-called Conservative Blue Wall. This is the heartland for the Conservative Party, and I think we'll see some Labour seats there, and also probably a fair few Liberal Democrat seats too.
Right, now, forgive me if I...
Come on over, sir.
Come on
Enjoy
over.
my map. And you know what, Richard?
Yeah, go on.
We have a wild card.
Go on.
Because this map from 2019 is on new boundaries. Now, a wild card has been that 9 out of 10 constituencies have changed. Some have added a couple of households. Some have gained 3 new areas. Some have new names. So that makes this...
To talk about what the future is for the Conservative Party. I don't agree, obviously, that Callum's sort of suggestion that British politics would just be better if there were no Conservative Party.
It hasn't really been thinking about Brexit for years. They might be able to negotiate little piecemeal deals in certain economic sectors, and that would be good news, I guess, for Britain, because what we have seen in the polls is that most Britons 8 years after Brexit have had second thoughts, some serious second thoughts, and a majority now actually have indicated in recent polls that if they had to do it again, they might not vote to leave. So in the Europe issue, Brexit, no, they're not going to re-enter the bloc. They might try to get some better deals out of it. On Ukraine, big issue. We know that the Tory party had staunchly stood behind Ukraine. They made it one of their, defining issues, and they threw their military, diplomatic, political support behind Volodymyr Zelensky and Kiev. That's not going to change under Labour. Labour's made it clear.
A third of the population voting for you. I mean, this is a big problem. And
But to be fair to Harriet and Alistair, you've got to win according to the rules of the game that you're playing.
Yes.
So your vote is much more efficient. I mean, that's what's happening with the Lib Dems. They've got 10%, I think, roughly, and they're going to get 61 seats.
But it's a big problem for legitimacy, and it's a big problem for your future campaign.
Emily.
Do you know, Vince, what your percentage was to that point? I mean, what are you expecting? Because you are incredibly efficient as a party, aren't you, at sort of getting your votes in the right places to win the right number of seats?
Yes, I think it's probably about 11 or 12%, something of that order. And as you say, it's efficient. But it's not just a question of just randomly picking certain areas. When we start building up a local government base, many of the people who will be elected tonight have been leading councils. You know, they've got experience, they've developed a profile. So it's building up on something. So these are actually quite secure, these areas where we've targeted.
And you've done it on a first-past-the-post system. I guess you and Anne, Reform and Lib Dems, are kind of strange bedfellows in that you both believe very strongly in a change of the electoral system. Now we're about to see, we think we might see 13 new MPs Reform come in. Are you still wedded to that system?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it's not just that it was bad for us. I mean, we're learning to work within it, but it's actually a very unsatisfactory system, produces unrepresentative government. I mean, this is why, in a way, the whole issue about reform of the House of Lords becomes important, and it presents a...
In 2015 was then expressed in 2016 at the referendum.
Assailable for 2 terms, and I think what this does show is that our democracy is alive and well. Devastating for my party, a clear need to rethink, to regroup, to regain the trust of the people. But at the same time, we do need to wait for some proper results and not just look at the exit poll. And I think, as John Curtis said earlier, there's quite a lot to be looked at in terms of how many votes were cast and what the impact is on tactical voting and, of course, voting for reform.
But Andrea Leadsom, you're a very experienced politician. You're in the cabinet for a long time, doing lots of different jobs. You know
that we can have an election where, as Wes has said, in 2019 it was the Conservatives' night to have a huge majority, and it was potentially unassailable for 2 terms. And I think what this does show is that our democracy is alive and well. Devastating for my party, a clear need to rethink, to regroup, to regain the trust of the people.
Has Rishi Sunak handled them in the wrong way?
You know, it's never easy when you are the Prime Minister to decide when to call a general election. You know, we saw that with Gordon Brown back in 2010, where he was slated for not calling the general election, and we've had months and months and months of opposition politicians saying, call a general election. And when the Prime Minister decided to do it,
I'm asking you about reform and how much damage they've done to the Tories.
Reform, according to the exit poll, has done vast damage to the Conservatives, but we will find out exactly how much so. But your question was Rishi Sunak right to call the general election? I'm trying to answer that. It is a very, very difficult and very personal decision for any Prime Minister, and he will have taken into account the potential impact of reform, the consequences of, you know, the economy turning a corner, the fact that real wages are rising. You know, there are all sorts of factors that he will have taken into account. So it's very easy, I think, always in hindsight to say, well, that was a really bad decision. But actually, I think these are very, very considered issues.
But implicit in Laura's question was the way that Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party handled reform. Hardly went after them in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the campaign. Only really getting stuck in after those dreadful comments, allegedly, from one of the supposed workers for Nigel Farage in Clacton. The kid gloves. Because you were hoping, obviously, to get some of the voters who might be leaning for reform. That didn't work.
Extremely worried for their staff, primarily for their activists. Obviously, they will be losing their jobs. But if just the drama and excitement of election night, you've spent weeks campaigning. And then the day, you start off at 5 o'clock in the morning doing sort of dawn leaflet drops, and the day races away from you. And then when you arrive at the counts at these sport halls...
You know, 4 million more people in work, low unemployment, real wages rising. We turned the corner. We got through the COVID pandemic. We're recovering fast, doing equally joint first in the G7 in terms of growth last month. You know, there's a lot, all of the net zero achievements and so on, plus what we considered was a very real concern about what Labour will do, as continues to be the case, a very real concern about what Labour will do with people's taxes. And so, you know, yes, maybe it was wrong not to go after reform straight away. But again, all of these things are very carefully thought through as to what is the right approach. And what we wanted to do was to focus on what Labour would be doing with people's taxes.
We're just going to cut in there because we've got a declaration.
Acting Returning Officer, hereby give notice that the total number of votes for each candidate for the Horton and Sunderland South constituency is as follows. Richard Peter Bradley, 1,723. Chris Bernicle, 5,514. Paul Edgeworth, 2,290. Bridget Maeve Phillipson, 18,837. Sam Woods Grass, 11,668. The number of rejected ballot papers was 101. The turnout was 51.2%. And that Bridget Maeve Phillipson has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
So a delighted Bridget Phillipson there, who can now expect not just to stay as the MP at Sunderland South, but who can expect to become the Education Secretary, having done that job as a shadow for Keir Starmer for the last few years. She receives more than 18,000 votes, but Reform have beaten the Conservatives into second place. Let's listen in to Bridget Phillipson's victory speech. She's likely to be in the Cabinet by the end of the weekend.
The British people have spoken, and if the exit poll this evening is again a guide to results across our country, as it so often is, then after 14 years the British people have chosen change. They have chosen Labour, and they have chosen the leadership of Keir Starmer. Today, our country, with its proud history, has chosen a brighter future. The British people have decided that they believe, as Labour believes, that our best days lie ahead of us. Hope and unity, not decline and division. Stability over chaos. A government powered by hope, by the belief that tomorrow can not just be different from today, but better. A government of service, a government with purpose, above all to change our society for good. A government determined to build a Britain where background is no barrier, no matter who your parents are or where you are born. Determined to tear down the barriers to opportunity which hold back too many of our children. That is Labour's purpose, and the result today speaks to the trust the British people have put in our changed Labour Party. And after 14 years as your Labour MP in opposition, I am so proud to be part of a party which has tonight not just won the trust of people here in Houghton and Sunderland South, but of the people across Britain. Labour will honour the trust that you have placed in us. I will honour the trust that you have placed in me. And I will work every day to deliver the promises that Labour has made and the better future that we, each of us and all of us, deserve. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. And lastly, I want to say thank you to all of the people who've worked hard to organise and secure today's election and counted the votes this evening. You are the people who deliver our democracy, and we are grateful for your contribution. My thanks to the fellow candidates here in Houghton and Sunderland South for a good-tempered campaign, to my fantastic local Labour Party for your unwavering support, and to my wonderful agent, Les Scott. Thank you.
Bridget Phillipson there, delighted, beaming away, not just having won her seat, but expecting now to be in the cabinet. And in her speech, she said, the British people have decided. Labour will return government to service of the people and create a country where background is no barrier. Bridget Phillipson there very decisively saying that Labour has won the general election. We'll discuss that a bit more in just a sec.
Yeah, and Labour's vote increase there in line with our exit poll. And that's the first result we've had all night. Jackie, the bank teller.
The first MP
I think she did it, and the first MP elected into the new parliament, yeah. Let's talk to Jacob Rees-Mogg, who can join us from North Somerset. Hello to you. Thank you.
Much more than a swing from Tory to Labour. It's a 13% swing. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And it's a Leave area, so that's not perhaps that surprising. How reflective do we think it'll be of other areas?
Well, I think it's quite reflective. But the thing that I might be banging on about quite a lot in the early part of the evening as well, turnout. Right. Last time the turnout here was 57%. This time the turnout here was 51%. So there are lots of people in Houghton and Sunderland South who decided not to bother this time, and we may be looking at the lowest turnout at a general election since 2001, which Ed, of course, will remember was the turnout when John Prescott told us all that everyone was so happy with the Labour government they didn't have to bother to go out and vote.
Jane, can I ask you to explain that?
So the low turnout...
I think we all thought of... Maybe this is group thing, but I think we probably thought of this election as voters being quite motivated to want to change a government, but it doesn't look like that at all, does it?
So there are some common factors. When turnout goes down, it tends to be that people don't see a large difference between the parties. And so that's pretty consistent, I think, with a Labour, kind of modest Labour campaign in ideological terms. And the other factor is that if you see a foregone conclusion, if you think it doesn't really matter if I vote because it's obviously going to be a Labour win, then you're less likely to turn out to vote. So those are two factors that are potentially depressing turnout. And then, I started off the top of the programme thinking of this election as the disillusionment election. Perhaps that sense of not really seeing the real alternatives in this particular electoral context, not really having confidence that either of the two major parties was going to make a massive difference. Some of those disillusioned voters have clearly gone to Reform UK. Many of them may have just stayed at home.
But Jane, in this constituency, turnout's gone down, the Labour vote has gone up. So does that mean that the turnout is mainly Conservatives staying at home?
You're basically saying
wow, you guys have bucked the trend because everyone else is going hard right.
Sort of.
So a left-of-centre government has just been elected in the UK. We shouldn't forget that. Look, and also the swing in Bridget Phillipson's seat there is 3.4% swing Labour to Reform. So, and Kwasi's right, Reform will do well in quite a lot of seats that Labour win. But I completely agree with Harriet. You'll never beat Farage at Farage's own game. Labour have to have a strategy, to my mind, that is about delivery on the things that Farage exploits. And I think that is the challenge that Labour now face. And they've got the mandate to do it. They can do big, bold things. But they won't do it by saying, let's do what I think Rishi Sunak did, which is actually sort of lean towards them but not really mean it.
Right. We probably need to talk a little bit about those boundary changes. In a way, it's a combination of A-level
down to normal. We recognise that that is part of the impact of COVID, the weaponisation of energy prices, the war in Ukraine. But what we want to see is, a very much. We don't want to see the arguments in Westminster. We want to see a clear focus on that, and I think that's been the challenge.
Bear with me, because Trevor does want to come in, but we've just crunched the numbers in Horton and Sunderland. 13-point swing from Conservative to Labour. Conservative vote down 19 points. Labour up 6.7. Reform up 13.4. Trevor?
That is in the essence here, isn't it? That you first got to, if you wanted to deal with the problem you've got, you first got to recognise and acknowledge what it is. In the result that Kay's just quoted, essentially, your vote halved, Reform's votes doubled. Surely the first thing you've got to do is to acknowledge that fact and try to understand what happened.
So, with respect, Ed, so the first thing we need to do is we need to see all the results come in so that we can judge the discussion in terms of what's happened, not based on one constituency,
and
but
the
on
exit
many.
poll.
Each constituency is a different electoral context with lots of contextual factors which will be related to the campaigns that candidates are running, their reputation, their delivery for local people. In my constituency, I campaigned very hard on improving rail services, supporting our schools, getting better protection from flooding, enhancing access to NHS services, dealing with air and noise pollution and fighting against the ULEZ expansion. Every constituency will have different contextual factors. And so I hear what you're saying, you've got to look at the results and you've got to analyse that. And I suspect there's going to be plenty of analysis tonight and much more for the weeks to come. But what I do think it's reasonable to say, let's not just base it on one constituency out of 650. We need to look at the whole piece.
I need clarification on something from that results, because you said that the Reform vote was up 13.4%. The Reform has never stood there before. So what are we using as the base? The Brexit Party base. Now, in that constituency, UKIP...
I'm going to be sending around the T's and C's for you all to sign later.
OK, thank you very much, Hannah. Harriet, you wanted to say something about this.
The boundaries are obviously incredibly important, but one of the things that I hope Keir Starmer will do will be to do something about the problem with the boundaries, because the Electoral Commission says that there are 7 million people who are entitled to vote and entitled to be on the electoral register who are not on the electoral register, and therefore the boundaries are not properly distributed. So, for example, those 7 million people are more likely to be inner city, young, urban, renters, black, and therefore those groups of people are not properly represented in Parliament. And there's a disproportionate number of constituencies where on the electoral register there are people who are white, middle class, home-owning, suburban or rural. And therefore that needs to change, and we need to sort the electoral register out, and it's the register which underpins the boundaries, because if that had been sorted out, we would have something like 8 more seats in London, 5 more seats in Birmingham. I mean, the political underpinning of our democracy is not actually representing the people who live here, and that can be sorted with AI and various other things.
Gary, just briefly, I mean, we've already had a concession from David T.C. Davis. Apparently, the exit poll is suggesting Grant Shapps will lose his seat. Any other big beasts we can point out at the moment in terms of the exit?
It's also suggesting Penny Mordaunt will lose her seat, and
Scottish seat to declare. in 2019. That result came in just before 1:30 in the morning. And Rutherglen is also one to watch because of last year's by-election. You may remember that the SNP's Margaret Ferrier was ousted through a recall vote after being convicted of breaking COVID rules. Labour's Michael Shanks won the by-election that followed. Now, the constituency has changed quite a lot after the boundary review, but we won't have too long to wait now to find out how they have voted tonight. Yes, more results from the northeast of England expected soon. Blythe there amongst them. The first Scottish result, always, as we said, probably Rutherglen at around 1:30 this morning. The peak of the results around 3, so do stay up. And the story is still very much unfolding, but some plucky newspaper sub-editors have already filed their front page headlines for the early editions tomorrow, so let's take a look. The Sun is going with this. Britain sees red, a picture of Sir Keir Starmer and his wife Victoria looking pretty happy there. Next we have The Telegraph. It goes simply with Labour landslide. And now The Mirror. Bit more jaunty. Here we go. Starmer and Labour in thumping landslide victory. Different headlines, but all pretty much in agreement, Martin.
Yeah, that certainly seems to be the UK story, Laura. Thank you very much indeed for that. We saw Nicola Sturgeon there on another election results programme describing this as a seismic night for Labour, grim for the SNP. You'll notice at the corner of my desk here, Liz Lloyd has replaced Kes Dugdale. Liz was, of course, Nicola Sturgeon's Chief of Staff during her tenure as First Minister.
Milk and honey. We've been very, very careful in terms of our ambition and what we're able to offer, because we don't want to fail the people. We don't want to overpromise. So actually, although the manifesto, there were some very clear, really enlightened policies, I think. If you look at how quickly we're going to deliver, we've been very clear with the public. We have got to get the economy back on track before we expand public services, and you can't, that's not an overnight job. But what people will have now is stability. And if we get the kind of majority we're looking at, we're talking perhaps not about 5 years, but 10 years. If you get 10 years, people seriously start to reinvest.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. I know you were trying to get in there, Lord Chairman. Thank you to you both. Back to you, Nick.
So, Larry, thanks very much indeed. Right, let's do another little bounce round South Wales now. Actually, we are going to go to the Vale of Glamorgan. We're going to go to Bridgend. And close at home, we're going to go, certainly where we are now, we are going to go to Cardiff and speak to our correspondent, Mark Hutchins. But first of all, we're going to go to the Vale of Glamorgan, one of those key marginals over the years, but it's been pretty comfortable territory for the Conservatives. And Hugh Thomas is there for us tonight. Hugh, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Nick, I'm in the Memorial Hall in Barry, and this seat, Vale of Glamorgan, held by Alan Cairns, former Welsh Secretary since 2010, but that could be changing tonight. I've been down on the floor speaking to all the different
representative, then that's the way you need to vote in this type of election. In a PR election, it's slightly different because you can go down the ballot and votes will transfer. But nobody can pretend that in a Westminster election, first past the post, that you do not know what you're doing when you put a candidate up against the leading unionist candidate when you know that there's a battle to hold that seat. You're deliberately targeting that seat in order for the leading unionist candidate to lose. And I think that's a very short-sighted, damaging approach to the cause of the union. And I think, and many of us urged Jim Allister to think again, but unfortunately, in some seats, he went ahead with that.
And the thing is, of course, he did think again as far as Upper Band's concerned, and he decided not to stand a candidate there because he felt that the DUP's candidate, Carla Lockhart, could come under pressure from the Sinn Féin candidate, and Sinn Féin could potentially take that seat. And that's why he didn't run a candidate there.
Yeah, I mean, it's for him to decide where of course, where he runs and how he justifies it. But, I mean, he did take that decision in that case, so he could have taken that decision in other cases, but decided not to. Look, I regret that. I think that the cause of the union, and many people have said this, the main issue is to have unionist representation, from our point of view, in the House of Commons, and that's best served by Gavin Robinson getting as many votes as he can in East Belfast, obviously.
Right.
I mean, in terms of North Down, just to comment on that, we've focused on this sort of split between Alex Easton and Tim Collins and taking votes from each other. But there are many people out there who have told me that the Alliance Party are worried about the fact that Tim Collins could be taking votes from the Alliance Party. And that could help Alex Easton. So, I mean, it's a complicated picture in North.
Seems to be understating the Conservative vote and overstating the Reform vote in here. Now, whether that's played out across the country...
Not much, but yeah, the Tories, yeah, 6% versus...
Now, in Scotland, we have something called shy Tory syndrome, whereas in our darkest days, a lot of people that voted for us wouldn't say that they voted for us.
Well, that thought Blythe is declaring. Blythe is declaring.
I'd like to invite the returning officer, the High Sheriff of the Northumberland, and candidates onto the stage for the declaration.
OK, just moving on to the stage, as you can see, as I was explaining to you, Ian Lavery would hope to be the MP for this constituency. He was the former Labour Party chair under Jeremy Corbyn, and for a while, as I said, under Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer as well, who we are yet to hear from, but I'm sure we will very shortly indeed. Oh, nice hat, madam.
Love it. Mr. Bridgman, returning officer for the Blythe and Ashington parliamentary constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given to each candidate was as follows. Ian Lavery, Labour Party, 20,030. Maureen Levy, the Conservative Party candidate, 6,121.
Let's keep an eye on the Reform.
Steve Leyland, the Green Party, 1,960. Mark Peart, Reform UK, 10,857.
Like it's an easy win for Labour. Just
Stephen
let's finish it off with the
Anthony
Lib Dems.
Salidas, Liberal Democrats, 1,433.
Easy win there for you.
Yeah, I'm really pleased for Ian. Ian really
49% for Labour is the
that
exit
result.
poll projection.
Yeah, it's a very strong result that for him. And I'm sure, you know, he will absolutely be delighted. And actually, that bodes well for us in the North East. So really, really pleased to see that. Obviously, Reform coming second again. Yeah. But then we just had what Ruth was saying before, that the exit poll may be overstating Reform and understating the Tories. So we need to see that result now, don't we, in relation to the exit poll?
But what's interesting here is this is very clearly Reform being in second place. And this could be a story of the night. This could actually be a big story coming into the next election in 5 years' time of it, if it's no...
Put up swing, it'll show practically nothing, won't it? Yeah, like a Labour to Reform swing.
And turn out down 4%.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
Rob, yeah,
to be
sorry.
clear, the vote share for Labour's only gone up because the turnout is down. The actual numbers of votes polled by Ian Lavery are down, which feels pretty significant. And again, the Reform increase is dramatic. I mean, it's, you know, they've trebled the number of, almost trebled the number of votes that they've won in this constituency. But I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about this turnout issue. Pretty much all the opinion polls showed very large numbers of people at the end saying they weren't going to vote. Pretty much all the some of the pollsters believed them, and some of the pollsters then actually distributed those votes in a way that in most cases showed the Tory party actually doing a bit better than other polls. Now, if the vote share is as low as it might be, then actually, I mean, I think in terms of the margin of error, in terms of the exit poll, you could end up seeing fewer Tory seats and more Labour seats, because that is what the MRPs showed with lower turnouts built into their assumptions. And I have to say, talking to people in both camps, they are fearful of that. They are fearful that, dramatic as this exit poll is in terms of the number of Labour MPs and the size of the Labour majority, it could be even bigger than this if we get, you know, if those people who said they weren't going to vote genuinely haven't voted.
These things are, to a degree, modelled into the exit poll. In fact, on the first two results we've had, Houghton and Sunderland South and in Blythe and Ashington as well, the exit poll sort of under the radar figures are pretty similar to what's actually happening in the constituencies. So
OK, I just want to pick up on one thing, just briefly, before we move on, because we talked about it a little bit. Does it matter that Keir Starmer hasn't got this massive personal popularity that Tony Blair had in '97? Does it actually matter in the politics of...
It doesn't matter tonight. I mean, he's won a tremendous victory, so, and George is right, we shouldn't try to take that away from him. I think it starts to matter. The reasons behind the victory start to matter as he starts to govern. I mean, if this is a mass rejection of the Tories, which I suspect it is more than a huge endorsement of Labour, then, you know, particularly given that he's gone through the entire campaign without really confronting any of the big issues that the country faces, how does he then govern, and how does he then deliver on the expectations that that massive majority will create? And if he doesn't quickly deliver, what then starts to happen to, you know, support for reform, to levels of discontent? You know, for my own party in Scotland, that may turn out to be a good thing as we approach a Scottish election. But elsewhere, you know, what happens to that? So I think it becomes an issue. You know, Ed is probably right. There's more of a plan there than has been shown during the election campaign. But the problems right now are bigger, more systemic, more challenging than when Tony Blair came to office. And the tools he has in his toolbox to tackle them, and the mandate arguably has on the big issues, much, much diminished.
Is it not plausible that lower expectations at Ed are not a bad thing, potentially?
But are there lower expectations? Out of a result like this, so why can't he suddenly make people's lives feel better? He's got this massive majority. Why can't living standards rise? Why can't we start to see improvements in the NHS? And if that doesn't happen quickly, then where do people go? What happens then?
I think you have to start from the political challenge, which was that in 29, Labour was led by Jeremy Corbyn, and they lost terribly. And there were lots of people, I was one of them, who thought this could not be turned around in a parliament. You'd have to have a Neil Kinnock figure. We were talking to Neil earlier, who took the Labour Party from the ignominy of defeat in 1983 all the way through to 92 and failed, and finally handed over to Tony Blair, who won. I didn't think this could be done in a term, and Keir Starmer has done it.
How much of that was down to Boris Johnson, though? Rather
but you know, I think if you are Keir Starmer and you've won, then, you know, I'm not sure he's too bothered about how much it was due to Boris Johnson or Liz Truss, because he's just won. They had a strategy, and they've succeeded. They've done something which many people thought couldn't be done. You're totally right that the challenge now in governing is very hard. I don't know if he's got a plan. I was saying I hope he's got one. What I'm saying is I don't think that you should...
I think we all at this stage hope he's got a plan.
Because he has just won quite dramatically. I do think that the challenge of this parliament is going to be very hard indeed. But you have to kind of give them credit for the fact they had a strategy to allow the Tories to destroy themselves. And it
turned out the Tories were really, really good at it. Now, listen, we...
to rather a greater extent than we expect another Labour seat. So we'll have to wait and see. But broad message, Conservative votes down very heavily, Reform is up a lot, and Labour are making a modest advance. So that broad picture, at least, is there with the exit poll. It's just the fine detail. We've still got to see where we end up at the end of the night.
And turnout has been down as well. How much has that been a contributing factor?
Well, we don't know whether it's a contributing factor, but I think there has been a widespread expectation that turnout would fall, and these first two results are at least consistent with that expectation. And to that extent, at least, we may well discover that we're heading towards one of the lower turnouts in general elections in post-war electoral history. And, you know, that's what the polls were anticipating. It's what you would expect in an election in which the polls were suggesting it's pretty clear who was going to win, and where there wasn't that much difference, despite both parties' denials, that much difference between Conservative and Labour in much of what they were offering the electorate.
All right. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Now then, let's go to Jeremy with what he has from our latest calculations as they develop. It looks like it could be tonight, Jeremy, a really massive redrawing of the map. Oh, look, handy.
Yes.
You've got a big one
Look
there.
at that. That was so brilliantly cued in. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, look, here is our map. This is from last time, though, crucially. So this is the 2019 map. And you see, don't you, the wash of Conservative blue from Boris Johnson's 80-seat majority. And I'll switch it now to what the exit poll is showing us. And we stress again and again, just predictions. But look at the way Labour red spreads out from the urban areas to cover so much of England. Bear in mind, a lot of the Conservative seats are larger geographically. That one I'm just stepping on there is Rishi Sunak's, for example. So this kind of map can give you a false impression that there are more Tory seats than there are. I will just say, though, it's very interesting to see maybe Reform less strong in Scotland and the Conservatives here in the south of Scotland and the middle of Scotland as well. Scotland and the Conservatives is going to be an interesting subtext in this story of the night. Now, let me do something that'll help us understand what the map is looking like, and it's this. If I change every single seat and make it the same size, make them into hexagons, it then shows you really clearly what we're looking at. So we're back in 2019 here. Back in the, and you can see the scale of the Boris Johnson victory, can't you, with so many of these blue hexagons. I'll now change this to the exit poll, so just have a look at the change here. Okay, this is 2019 still, and I'm showing you the majorities. The majorities are shown by the height of the hexagon. The taller the hexagon, the clearer the win for the party whose colour the hexagon is. So you can see an awful lot of 2019 big majorities here for the Conservatives, particularly in the south of England. So now let's change to 2024 and let's have a look and see what the exit poll is showing us. And look at those hexagons lowering. The Conservative seat majorities going down, being replaced by red ones. You've got, for example, Portsmouth North, Penny Mordaunt's seat just over there, Leader of the House of Commons, has gone from quite a sizable Conservative hexagon to a red one. So that is what we're looking at. It's an amazing map, that, isn't it? Because when you make the constituencies all the same size, you get a real sense of just how much Labour red is covering the UK. And of course, the interesting thing as well is that you're seeing some marginal Conservative seats, which have been blue for a long time, turning into safe Labour. Back to you.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. He's got all sorts of new snazzy toys, but it does show you what might happen in really, really vivid detail.
OK, so we've had a few results in. Chris?
Reform UK. It's quite a standout. I know we've reflected on it in the last couple of minutes. Sorry, I was just typing something away there for the BBC News app. But given what I've just typed, I might as well say it out loud as well.
You're moonlighting already.
Yeah, a bit of, you know, exactly. You know, those first two results, seeing how well Reform were doing, as we were reflecting a few minutes ago, yes, in parts of the world in the northeast of England that significantly backed Brexit. But here is a party that, I mean, I'm exaggerating madly, but was sort of, you know, came about a week last Wednesday. It's a new entity on the political stage. One of the standout moments of the election campaign was Nigel Farage's decision to come back in, be the leader of the party, be a candidate too. And one of the big questions was how much difference would they actually make? And the early evidence, both from the exit poll, but with the caveats around smaller parties, and these first two results, is they are making one heck of an impression. More than a quarter of the vote in those first two results, and how that maps out through the night. And then, crucially, particularly if Reform managed a number akin to what we're suggesting in the exit poll of 13, the dynamic in the House of Commons of the Reform with potentially around a dozen MPs and a rump of a Conservative Party thrashing around trying to find out who it is, what it wants to be and what went wrong, is a very interesting kind of conversation that we're going to see alongside a period, as it would seem, that a new Labour government is taking office and getting its head around what it's going to do.
All right. Chris, thank you for that.
Well, let's have that conversation then right now with Dr. David Bull, who joins us from the Reform Party. You are looking extremely chipper, I have to say.
Yes.
Do you think, from your own data, that actually achieving 13 seats is something that looks realistic?
Yes is the short answer. If you look at this, and if that exit poll is right, this is an historic moment. As Chris said, we're 4 years
when the SNP are telling me that they're not entirely sure they're going to hold on to Dundee Central. That was their safest seat in Scotland. That would require a swing of more than 16% for Labour to take it. That gives you some indication of just how seismic this change is. I also think it's interesting to note that this was a different election here in Scotland. Yes, it was about the future of the NHS, it's about housing, it's about child poverty, about the cost of living crisis. But it was the SNP who decided to put independence front and centre of their election campaign. Page 1, line 1 of their manifesto. The architect of putting independence front and centre of this general election campaign is in our studio tonight, Nicola Sturgeon. She was the one who said that this would be a de facto referendum on independence to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to have their say on Scotland's future in the UK, because that was an opportunity that was being denied when Prime Minister after Prime Minister said no to a second independence referendum. This general election was supposed to be that de facto referendum. Now, since Nicola Sturgeon left as party leader and First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf and now John Swinney as the SNP leaders that have taken over have kind of downgraded that a little bit. But the clear message in the SNP manifesto in this election, as I say on page 1, line 1, front and centre, a vote for the SNP is a vote for independence. John Swinney told me a vote for the SNP is a vote for independence, and he told me as well a vote for any other party risks damaging the independence cause going forward. Stephen Flynn, the SNP's leader at Westminster, told me in an interview independence is on the ballot paper. Now, I'm being told by some of the people here tonight, some of the SNP staffers who are saying, well, this was about change at Westminster, we've been caught up in this election about kicking out the Tories. But the SNP set the terms. These were their terms. This was also about independence in Scotland, and if this exit poll is to be believed, the people of Scotland have had their say, and perhaps the message is that independence for them is not a priority right now. That's going to be something that's going to be carrying into the next election, because what's crucial, Tom, is that although Prime Ministers have ignored the SNP and said, no, now is not the time, now is not the time, Nicola Sturgeon was on the receiving end of a few of those messages back from starting with Theresa May after the Brexit vote, and there was a huge clamour to have another vote in Scotland. But what I think it's important to remember is that if the SNP had won a majority on these terms that were crystal clear that a vote for the SNP is a vote for independence, it would have been extremely hard for Keir Starmer to shrug that off. It would have been a thorn in his side for the next 5 years. He would have to address it, have to acknowledge it, that the people of Scotland had an opportunity to have their say, and they would have backed that message. The people of Scotland had that opportunity, and it does not look like they have backed that. It's now going to be much, much easier for Prime Minister Keir Starmer to ignore any future calls. The SNP will say they still have a mandate for a second independence referendum going back to 2021, that Holyrood vote. The pro-independence parties have a majority at Holyrood, but it's going to look pretty weak when we're seeing such a heavy defeat when they put independence front and centre of their campaign in this election. And what I would say, Tom, is that there will be people who are watching ITV tonight who might have previously watched other channels because they're keen to hear from Nicola Sturgeon on this. With independence front and centre, to say she was the architect of putting it so prominently on this election campaign, they've been wanting to know what her analysis is. What next for not just the SNP, but next for the independence cause? What does it mean for the independence cause? And perhaps to see if there might be a mea culpa or two in that assessment.
OK, Peter, thank you very much. That feels like...
I think Peter's getting a wee bit there.
OK, no. Simple question, was it a mistake? I mean, you were clearly the architect of it. You had a frustrating time. You made clear that if you won the Scottish parliamentary elections, that you would consider that a mandate for independence. You didn't get any joy, and you were in a frustrating corner. But it was your decision to continue to put it front and centre. Was it a mistake, and do you accept that this is the cause off the agenda now for perhaps at least 5 years?
No, I don't, and I think that's a foolish conclusion for opposition parties to reach, but I'll come back to that in a...
Let's see what happens with all
You think there are Conservatives who could be taking this on?
No. Let's see what happens to the figures. When Labour are in and the Rwanda plan is absolutely jettisoned and the deterrent's been taken off the table, let's see what happens over the next month in the number of illegal... And Harry, you're quite right. Nobody does object, I think, to legal immigration that has been through due process, to people who are coming here to provide services. I think, and that number is far greater than the number of illegal immigrants. I think what people actually are concerned about is the number of people arriving in boats and the degree of illegal immigration. unless we start having lots more babies in the future, then we're going to have to... Those levels of legal immigration are probably going to remain high, even higher than they are now. It's the illegal immigration. It was the Rwanda plan that was there on the table to deal with that, and that's what people are concerned about.
But let's be honest, as Conservatives, I mean, it's not just about the illegal numbers, it's the legal numbers. I mean, the thing that happened at the end of last year was a massive...
Can I just ask you, Kwasi, did you always think that the Rwanda plan was a shocker? You're out now. I mean, you can say what you want.
Look, I had doubts about it in terms of the deliverability.
Would you go as far as James Cleverly? Absolute bullshit?
Well, I don't think he said that.
Well, I think he's probably
Is that what he said? It was an ambitious plan.
No, he denied that he said that.
But I want to get back to this legal immigration, because the point that Farage makes isn't the fact that we have lots of illegal immigration. He says that legal numbers last year were 745,000 in 1 year, which is the size of Coventry. And then he makes the point that, you know, when people like my parents or Christian's parents came over, that the average was between 30 and 50,000 a year. So he's making a point about numbers. He's not just saying we want legal migration. He's saying it's too many. And I think a lot of people, a lot of Conservative voters as well, sympathise with what he's saying on that.
But do you feel you've also been hoisted by your own petard? I mean, you know, as you say, the legal migration figures are so much bigger than the illegal figures, yet your party made a big deal of the illegal
and that's
figures.
Because they were concerned.
And you made the mistake of raising something that is a right-wing issue, and you've been outflanked by it.
So what happened, and Rory and I stood on this, we in 2010, we said we would commit to thousands as a net figure. And when you've obviously got one figure of 745,000 in a year, that's a problem.
And you said it in 2015 and 2017 and kept breaking the promises.
Yeah, I think was a factor in the rise of reform. I think that's
But we couldn't deliver our public services on those figures of tens of thousands of legal immigration. We couldn't run our NHS if our legal immigration figures had gone down to 20 or 30,000.
So Nadine's absolutely right. I mean, part of the problem is that we were making promises we couldn't deliver. Why is the government bringing in these hundreds of thousands of people? Because every industry, every care home, every hospital is screaming for people. And they're trying to generate growth, and they're trying to keep the public services going. And it's, of course, Harriet's absolutely right. In the long run, Britain needs to train and provide these people, but that's going to take 5, 10, 15 years before you have the people coming in to fill those jobs. So it's also true, I'm afraid, that Nadim's right, that next government has got a big, big problem on its hands.
But, Rory, we have also addressed that issue. The number of places in medical schools have increased over the last 10 years, the number of places for nurses training, the number of people for care assistants, all those training, that workforce, particularly in the NHS. The NHS workforce has grown and the training places have grown. We just can't keep up with the rate of demand. That demand is partly created by the rise in population, which we have, which is pushing on to 68 million now, because partly it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the degree of legal immigration, which is creating a greater demand on the service.
We will definitely return to immigration, but it is almost midnight. It is almost tomorrow. So we're going to bring you the front pages of the papers as they are putting them to bed tonight for tomorrow morning. Britain sees red. Is the sun? We can't read that.
Labour landslide.
Labour landslide. Here it is. It's up there.
I can see.
Here we go. I think we could have predicted that one. There is Kieran, his wife Victoria. Labour set for historic landslide. The Daily Mail there. Dramatic exit poll. And exit poll puts Labour on course for landslide.
And Labour landslide is the Daily Telegraph headline.
They don't have much to say about it, do they? I mean, is that it? Or they just got it out quickly?
I mean, newspapers are meant to tell the story, and that is the story.
Yeah,
that's right.
You know, it is a Labour landslide. It's interesting how we've gone very quickly to talk about, you know, reform, immigration, all this stuff. The big news tonight is that there is a change of government. Obviously. And the Labour Party now has a...
Yeah, and that will be the big story.
And is Eel actually starting to smile here?
Who?
You.
Well, you didn't believe the polls.
I never believe the polls. And by the way, I agreed with you earlier. I honestly think that we've got to have a rethink about, well, including us on the podcast. We commission polls every week. And towards the end of it, I was thinking this is getting ridiculous because we have been talking about polls too much. There's been so little debate about policy in this campaign. It's been incredibly frustrating.
When your policy on the NHS is to get the NHS on track, what is there to talk about? Of course there was a focus on the polls because there was very little coming out in the way of policy from Labour. Get the NHS on track. That isn't a policy.
Well, there's plenty of things they say, but I also think the way the media, and it's not all the media's fault, but for example, I really think it's been a loss that we no longer have press conferences in election campaigns. They've just vanished. So you have the TV debates, which are these sort of, these consume...
Which were all terrible, in truth.
Well, they weren't great. They weren't great from anybody's perspective, from the format.
You didn't let anyone go to them. That's why they fizzled out.
When?
When you were running your campaign, didn't you famously used to
I don't know
keep
what you're
people
talking
from going
about.
to
I
the
don't
press
think you did
conferences
anything. I don't know what you're talking about.
We'll pick up polls again later on. But, I mean, no, I mean it's quite right that we spent a lot of time talking about the people who are coming second and third.
Of what, 80?
Yeah.
And that was partly by absorbing the people who are there tonight, as far as we can see, beginning to vote reform. In fact, Nigel Farage was so satisfied with the offer that was made by the Conservatives that he stood down his candidates. Wasn't that a situation in which what you actually did was postponed the choice that you have to make as a party, and you're paying the price for that tonight? And you are going to have to make a choice, aren't you?
No, I don't think so. I think it's possible to occupy many squares on the political chessboard at once. What I think the big mistake is to be a sort of reform-like kind of party that apes the policies and attitudes and mentalities of reform without really being sort of fully emotionally, intellectually committed to them. I think that's the mistake, because it doesn't come across as authentic.
OK. I know, John Redwood, that you want to come in. Thank you for being with us this evening. Are you echoing what we're hearing there from Mr Johnson?
No, I'm not. I mean, I think that the main problem was the cost of living crisis, allowing the inflation, not disciplining the Bank of England, then allowing taxes to go up to pay for the colossal bills of a rather overextended COVID lockdown. I think that was the big thing that drove people away from the Conservatives, because we'd promised lower taxes and successful economy and didn't deliver it. And then I think the other big letdown for voters, some of whom have gone off to reform, was a very clear promise to reduce overall migration, mainly legal migration, from the 200,000 level, which was already quite high, putting pressure on housing and access to housing for young people, for example. And instead, we trebled it. And that was obviously thought to be a very big letdown. And I think the new Labour government has got to understand that if they want to solve the problem of the long waiting lists in health, and they want to solve the problem of access to housing, rented and for purchase by young people, you cannot accommodate 600,000 or 700,000 extra people every year, much as you might like to.
John, just going back to that, when you look at the legal migration figures from the last 2 years of freedom of movement before the UK left the European Union, and then you look at the last 2 years of the Conservative government, they are massively bigger.
Yes, that's what I said.
I mean, the reason I read it is you were a massive backer of Brexit. Yeah. Do you think that part of this election result is that the public are saying to the Conservatives, you promised us things on Brexit and then you betrayed us, and that Brexit hasn't been a successful project, and now you are being punished for it?
Well, of course, that's part of it. That's what I just said. A lot of Brexit voters wanted control of borders. They weren't ideological about it, but they felt in the pressure of their communities that too many people were coming in, and there were these problems over public service access and housing access and price of housing and all the rest of it. And they were also worried about downward pressure on jobs, because a lot of the people invited in were to take jobs on very low levels of wage, and I and others have always wanted a higher wage, higher productivity, local labour economy. And that was very attractive to Brexit voters, and then they felt that hadn't been reflected in government policy. So, of course, that was part of the diversion, and quite a lot of people in the Labour movement understood that. They didn't want lots of cheap labour being brought in under permit. We need to do better at those 9 million people who are of working age, many of whom, with the right support, right training, right incentives, might be able to get a job.
But, John, isn't the point, though, that the nature of migration to this country has changed because of Brexit?
The heart of Reform UK are not known to the general public. The general public are looking for parties to back or candidates to support in order to lash out against the Conservatives,
It's
and Reform have been the beneficiary.
With the greatest of respect, that's absolute nonsense. These are
We've seen your candidates.
There are a very small...
We've seen your candidates.
Let me finish, please.
We've seen your candidates.
There are a very small number of candidates, and we have removed them and dealt with them. Let me just make one thing very clear, which is that we stood down. We gave Boris Johnson an 80-seat majority because he said he was going to get Brexit done. He did not get...
Nothing in common with politically. Either of you don't have anything in common. You've got the rise of Rassemblement National in France. Equally must be how are you going to establish relationships with these regimes that you just don't have anything in common with, if Trump wins in particular?
We're democratic countries. We all understand the big democratic fight we're discussing.
Well, you say that,
today.
but he doesn't even accept the results of a democratic election.
Tom, we have a formidable intelligence capability. Our armed forces demonstrated how acting together they can stop drones coming into countries like Jordan and Israel just a few months ago. For lots of reasons, with the world as it is, and the world is a pretty dangerous place, more conflict in the world than at any time since the Second World War. Of course, the United States and our country, along with our partners, will act together, and we will work with whomever the American people decide should be the incumbent of the White House. There's a lot of water to pass under the bridge, I might say, before convention season starts later on this month in November. So we'll watch the ups and downs. But if we do get over the line tonight, I look forward to working with Tony Blinken and Joe Biden over the coming months, and then we'll see who takes the helm in November or keeps the helm.
Do you think Joe Biden will be the candidate in the end?
Oh, look, I've got
different election. I know
too many friends of the Democratic Party reflecting on that question. I have no idea. That is for the American people. That is for the American people. We will work whomever they choose.
Okay. Last question. You're walking into potentially an enormous job at a very dangerous time. How worried are you about the state of the world that you're going to have to deal with?
Well, look, the last person who had the benefit of 2.5 years reflecting on the role was William Hague. And whilst William and I don't share the same politics, he was an effective foreign secretary. I set out a vision. It was reconnecting the UK with the global community, and something I described as progressive realism. And in thinking about that, I was thinking of Bevin after the Second World War. Attlee asked him to go out into the world. He found it to be a very dangerous place. He committed us to the nuclear deterrent, and he birthed NATO, which has proved to be so effective over so many generations.
Okay.
So that's the world we face. It's a tough world. We must act with our allies. We must be hard-headed, but we are still the 6th richest economy in the world. We still have a seat on the UN Security.
About health, but anyway, go on.
Anyway, I don't mind being interrupted at all, but I'm amazed that Harriet's sitting there so calm. Harriet Harman produced a report which established beyond any doubt at all that Boris Johnson is a proven liar. One of the reasons why your party is in such trouble...
We're going to get into that.
One of the reasons why your party has lost so badly tonight is because you keep defending a liar and because other people keep defending Liz Truss, who crashed the economy.
Hereby give notice that the total number of votes for each candidate for the Sunderland Central constituency...
Do you actually throw...
Acting Returning Officer, hereby give notice that the total number of votes for each candidate for the Sunderland Central constituency is as follows. Lewis Malcolm Atkinson, 16,852. Chris Einon, 10,779. Rachel Sarah Featherstone, 2,993. Niall Dane Hodson, 3,602. Greg Peacock, 5,731. The number of rejected ballot papers was 99. The turnout is 52.6%, and that Lewis Malcolm Atkinson has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
OK, there you have it, a result from Sunderland Central, but you'll have seen at the bottom of your screen there that Robert Buckland, who was speaking to us only a short time ago from his constituency in Swindon South, is out. I don't think that's a particular surprise because he effectively announced on air that he felt like his constituents were saying goodbye.
Is happening so far, and it's early days, no question, but Reform are eating into the Conservative share of the vote there. And look at the swing there from Labour to Reform, 7.7%.
And you see that kind of move there. And Peter Mandelson, we're hearing from our numbers that there is a 91% chance that Reform might take your old patch, the constituency of Hartlepool. If Hartlepool is won by the Reform Party, how would that feel for you?
It would be, I'd feel extremely bad and very disappointed, and I'd be surprised if it happened.
You would be surprised.
David?
I think you are about to be surprised. This is where I've been to Hartlepool, I've campaigned in Hartlepool, and when you knock on doors, people say they are sick and tired of the two main parties that don't represent them. That, you know, in terms of the offering you're putting forward, it doesn't represent the people of Hartlepool, it doesn't represent the people of, say, Clacton either. And I think this is very much a people's revolt. And you can call it a protest vote if you want, but actually it's not. It's an uprising. It's saying to the political classes, enough is enough.
I mean, Peter, I was talking to a Labour activist before we came on air. He was saying that on the doorstep, the response was very much, you're all the same. You're all the same. And in that kind of atmosphere, it is going to be the insurgent party, potentially, that gets the nod.
Clive, I think people over the last 10 years in all parts of the country have almost literally had the hope beaten out of them and their trust in the whole political system beaten out of them by one disaster after another. You know, the country feels so broken. It is hardly surprising that people are very, very angry. And now what the Labour Party has to do, should it form the government, as your exit poll would suggest it will, is prove them wrong, that they can see hope restored in the future of the country, and they can see a political system which is working for them. And that is the great challenge for an incoming Labour government.
All right. Peter Mandelson and Debbie Bull, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.
Right, well, just let's remind you of what the exit poll predicts, an enormous Labour majority with 410 seats, up significantly. The Conservatives crashing down to 131 seats. That's what the forecast is. Will one of them be the seat of Penny Mordaunt, who's been leader of the House of Commons? She's been the MP in Portsmouth North. Mark Easton, our colleague, is there tonight. Mark, are you seeing glum faces or relief in Penny Mordaunt's camp?
Well, very interesting, actually. Most of the candidates are here. Penny Mordaunt is not here, and we're told that she may not turn up until very close to the declaration, which is expected at around 3:30 this morning. Incredibly busy counting going on right now. This would be, I think, a very significant shock if Penny Mordaunt was to lose. I saw Jeremy Vine earlier saying it was a blue hexagon that was going to go red. The exit poll says actually too close to call, but at the same time says Penny Mordaunt has just a 25% chance of holding on here. The swing required for her to lose, if you just look at Tory to Labour, would be 17.2%. But what the sort of chatter is in this room is that actually what we're seeing here is a big increase in the Reform vote, just as you've been talking about all evening. Some people are suggesting we might have sort of 25% Reform vote in Portsmouth North, which would be a huge success for them, and perhaps would be the explanation for why indeed Portsmouth Guildhall is going to see one of the big shocks of election 2024.
Mark, thanks so much. Well, give us a wave if Penny Mordaunt turns up at her count a bit later in the evening. Let's see what happens there.
Yep, 3 seats declared so far. 3 Labour wins. so far, so normal, but the turnout has been low, and the story is Reform. Their share of the vote going up in those 3 counts so far. That's not going to be an issue, we think, in Northern Ireland. Because Andrea Catherwood joins us now from Belfast. Hi there, Andrea. Just paint a picture of the scene where you are.
Yes, very different here in Belfast, of course, because the people of Belfast and Northern Ireland vote for Northern Irish parties. Now, traditionally, the DUP over the last 20 years has been the party that's been the biggest Northern Irish party in Westminster. It is the party that is under the most pressure tonight because there is a chance that that could change. There's always been either the DUP or another unionist party having the most seats at Westminster. However, the DUP have had a really torrid time of it recently. Just at Easter, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, who was the leader, was charged with historic sex offences. They're charges that he denies. He resigned. His seat is vulnerable, but even more importantly, behind me, Belfast East is being counted. That is the new leader's seat, Gavin Robinson, and that is a really tight race up against another leader, the leader of the Alliance Party, Naomi Long. So you've got 2 party leaders, just 1 seat at Westminster, and that's going to be a really tight race tonight. An easier night here for Sinn Féin, the other major party. They had 7 seats at the last election. It looks like they're going to hold all 7 seats, although 1 is very tight. If they hold all 7 seats and the DUP lose a couple, then Sinn Féin could be the biggest single party from Northern Ireland at Westminster. It would be the first time ever that the Nationalists have held that position, that a Nationalist party held that position. It would be a significant milestone, and it could happen tonight.
That'll be fascinating. Andrea, thank you for that.
Well, history will be made tonight, potentially in all sorts of different ways. Let's go to James Cook, our Scotland editor, who's in Glasgow for us tonight. James, we've talked about this suggestion from the exit poll that the SNP might crash down to 10 seats at Westminster, which would be an absolutely phenomenal result for Scottish Labour.
Can read into exit polls what they choose. What I'm saying is that the seats that we were fighting closely, we were in close contention. It was going to be us or the SNP in those seats, and it is still going to be very, very close. So I wouldn't want to read anything into.
People, are wanting to get rid of. It's obviously a change election. We're seeing that in the polls from Scotland as well, aren't we? So that's always a challenge. But on the other hand, I think that going forward, as I said, when we're having these promises made daily in the Senedd that when we have 2 governments of the same colour, both ends of the N4, that there's going to be a new tomorrow for Wales. Well, it'll be very interesting to see if that actually happens. And I think as well with the reform figures that we're seeing, which are very worrying, I think again that is a result of not only a distrust in politics, of disillusionment, but also the fact that
in the Assembly, but it didn't seem to shy away from that point when Gareth put it to him about the prospect of Jonathan Bell replacing him if we do reach the point where Alex Easton needs to be replaced in the Assembly.
Yeah, well, we'll just be cautious and wait maybe for a few more votes to come out of the boxes and be counted before we call anything at this stage. Others can do what they want, but I think we'll be a little bit more careful about that. Nuala, I know you need to go because you're heading off to your account to see how you've done in North Belfast. What do you make of that conversation from North down there? Anything?
Yeah, I agree. It was bizarre. I have heard just word come through that there are still a lot of boxes to come through.
And would they be boxes that you think might be good for Stephen Farry?
Will be a bit of a mix, to be honest, and we are seeing him pull ahead.
Not necessarily, and I think that will pose a challenge.
Keir Starmer has said about what a Labour government is and is not going to do. I think we've all agreed his election campaign was quite limited in scope. The big question is, what is this new party? Anushka has some of the answers, and Ed has those that she doesn't.
Yes,
At least
I'm
I hope you do.
talk to you
We'll
a bit about who might be on Labour's backbenches in a minute. But just before I did, I just wanted to show this to you, Ed. Now, this is about reform. and it's where Reform comes second, according to the exit poll. Now, we're being very careful with Reform and the exit poll because there's huge margins of probability with them. They're a difficult actual party to judge for this. But they're going to come second, according to the exit poll, in 155 seats. So all of these, and then, have a look at this, all of these. Just to put that in context, in 2015, UKIP on the old boundaries came second in 120 seats only. And Ed, I just wanted to ask you this one question about this. I was asking Keir Starmer on the campaign about Reform, about Nigel Farage, and it was really notable that he did not want to engage. He kept saying, oh, I'm just not going to ignore, I'm going to ignore noises off. I said to him, that's rude to the millions of people who might want to vote for Reform. Is there a risk that Reform can come back and bite Labour, somewhere very polite, in the future?
Well, I think if you're Keir Starmer and you look at that graphic, the first thing you think is they're all red. They're all Labour. And frankly, who's come second in this election is less important than who's won. And Labour has won these
That's a bit
seats.
short term, isn't it?
No, but I'm just saying, look, it's election night and these are Labour seats. And the reason why they are Labour seats is because Reform is taking votes from the Conservatives. Keir Starmer has said that we're not joining the European Union in his lifetime. He blocks off that risk.
Can I just ask you, can I interrupt you for a second? Is this why?
Pardon?
Is this why? I mean, I was...
Vows include the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's seat in Richmond and Northallerton, Labour leader Keir Starmer's seat in Holbert and St Pancras, and Conservative Party Chairman Rick Holden is seeking a new seat in an Essex constituency thought to be a Conservative stronghold.
On the side of the Atlantic, it is 7 p.m, 7:15 at night. President Biden is going to speak again in the next hour in Washington. We'll be watching that. We've already heard him speak. And July 4th celebrations, see what happens over there.
We want to leave the United States for just a second. Of course, they have elections later on this year. We have election polling counting right now. Salma Abdelaziz, an election watch party hosted by Politico in London. And Salma, just speak to the mood as we're seeing, of course, this huge landslide here for Labour.
Absolutely. And at this watch party are really the political insiders who are trying to crunch those numbers and make sense of what the UK's political landscape will look like tomorrow morning when we have those results. Of course, all eyes, all the...
Well, I calibrated my remarks so that they could be leaked, and it's a question of the timing which fell into somebody else's hands, not mine. But, you know, as I say, I'm expected to be swept away in this tsunami. Many of your viewers will rejoice at it, I'm sure. Others
Are you not
so
feeling quite... I mean, you're very sanguine at the moment, but do you not feel quite angry about how the party has been run over the past 4 to 5 years that has meant that you are going to get swept away in this massive swing to Labour?
I know what, Beth, I am not angry. You and I have gone a long way through the last few years, haven't we? And, you know, I've 14 years of this. I've been involved in the main issues of the day repeatedly. I'm in all the history books, and it's just a matter of fact. It's been a hell of a 14 years. If it's time for me to go and do something else with my life, I can assure you I did not ask anyone to vote Conservative for my sake. If I lose, it will be the best thing that could happen to me and my wife.
You're being admirably clear-eyed about this, but can I just take you back to something that you said earlier on? Are you genuinely saying you think this is to do with social media? Are you saying there's nothing deeper going on here?
Oh, yeah, there definitely is. I mean,
okay,
I tweeted out...
What is it?
Earlier, I tweeted out a set of references, which I scheduled them because I knew I'd say it on the BBC and happy to say it here. What's going on, I believe, which is much more likely to explain the turmoil in North America and France as well as here, is we've spent 50 years as Western welfare states living far...
To my dad, who has been my hero from day one growing up in Colebrook Road, thank you for painting my office, putting up my garden stakes and putting out my bins when I forget them. Thank you to my mum for refilling my freezer, for providing a one-woman news monitoring service at the Swindon Advertiser, and for always believing in me. And thank you to my husband, Martin. 2 years ago, I said I wanted to come home. We uprooted a life we had built together in South East London, and you didn't blink. I simply wouldn't be the person I am without you. Thank you, Swindon. Thank you to all those who voted for me, and to those who didn't let me say this. I am here for you. I will represent our whole community with dedication and humility. Swindon, thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve. I won't let you down.
Well, there, Heidi Alexander, a former MP, now becomes the new Labour MP from Swindon South. That's the first Labour gain from the night. She's taken the seat from Robert Buckland, the former Tory minister. He's the first Conservative to lose. Let's listen in.
Officer and the incredible counting team that makes Swindon one of the most efficient counting centres in the United Kingdom. I know you've all been working for much of the day and for the rest of the night. There are many friendly faces here who we need to rely on for democracy to happen, and that's what's happened tonight. I'd like to thank the people of Swindon South as well, or should I say South Swindon, the seat that I had the honour of representing for 14 years through 4 elections. Although it was not to be.
Tonight, and he made it very clear he was going to lose his constituency. He has indeed, as we've already reported, lost his constituency. Let's hear what he had to say about it.
Mean relief.
Why?
Not hours of bloody politics. I need something to get me through it.
It all began on a wet Wednesday in May, and the BBC were live outside number 10 for a surprise announcement.
Good evening from Downing Street, where we learned this afternoon that a UK general election will take place in 6 weeks on Thursday, the 4th of July.
It's about time they called a bloody general election. They've been putting it off for ages.
Oh, fasten your seatbelts, Jenny.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament.
Never noticed before 1 year is twice the size of the other.
No, they're exactly the... Oh. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
It's a bit wet, Simon.
I know.
Oh, look at his lapels, are saturated.
He looks kind of sad getting wet.
It looks a bit pitiful.
You've managed your party, you've been an operator. You know all too well that the pressure for the next leadership race will be that there is a need to win back Reform voters, and it will tack to the right and it will point that in that direction, do you not think?
I think that there's a great deal of sense in what your analysis, because of course there is. The challenge for the next leader will be how to deliver a centre-right party and policy platform which appeals to the obvious coalition of voters who are there for the taking. What's happened here is that I don't think there's been a huge appetite for Keir Starmer's Labour. That's not what people have told me on the doorsteps. I don't think that's actually what's seen in the polls. People have just got fed up with us. But I think the rise of Reform really shows us that there is a coalition to be built here on the centre-right.
Steve, I've been credited you for coming on, by the way, and facing it in the way that you are. But, you know, can I just really get to the heart of it from your point of view? You were a big architect of Brexit. Do you have no regrets about how that's played out? Do you not think you should have backed Theresa May's deal?
No.
Well, people feel worse off because of the... Partly because of the disastrous Brexit that you've done.
Well, I've talked a bit about the monetary stuff and what's the underlying long-term trends, and I'd encourage anybody to look at the links I've tweeted out. If I'd backed Theresa May's Brexit deal, the Tory party would have split catastrophically, and we would have had this kind of wipeout.
The country might be better, though.
Well, we would have had this...
I bet you the country would be in a better place.
You've asked me a question, I'm answering it. If we'd had that kind of wipeout in front of Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, and I bet you wouldn't like a Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell government, they would have wrecked this country catastrophically. It would have been probably irrecoverable in all of our lifetimes.
Can I ask you a really personal question? Because you've had one of the more interesting journeys of any MP on any party, I think, from the kind of Brexit hard man to talking about...
Yeah, that was a mistake, but yeah.
Well, but talking about some of the ways in which your views have changed, the way in which you hold yourself now, the way in which you've had to practice mindfulness and other things because of...
I don't think I don't practice mindfulness. Who said that?
Sorry, you've talked a lot about the pressures
I've
that you've
talked once about the pressures, and that was to help other people. And, you know, I've had several people shake me by the hand and say I saved their life by doing it. So I'm very glad I did.
And that's why...
But I don't practice mindfulness, and I don't bang on about it.
Sorry. OK. But in terms of some of the journey that you've had...
drivers that we keep hoping for. These growth drivers are not going to be
good job in Lewisham as the MP to go and work for you. And you were saying, as she was giving her speech there, that you were taking credit for that.
We're going to win those. I've got to give credit both to Robert and to Heidi for those.
When he was asked, you know, he says that we're not going to raise taxes, the ones that you've just described, for working people. He was asked, what do you mean by working people?
Scotland and Wales, and it's quite remarkable because Heidi and I sat through 2019 when we were genuinely fearing our party was on the brink of extinction. Heidi came to work for me as my Deputy Mayor for Transport. Lo and behold, in 4.5 years, Keir Starmer's taken us to the cusp of power, quite remarkable, unprecedented, and hopefully during the course of the night you'll see more and more Labour gains, Labour gains, Labour gains. That's the first one.
Did you think this night could ever be possible within the space of one parliament? And remember, we are still talking about an exit poll here, but it seems to be going a certain way with the results.
So I've known Keir for almost 30 years. We're both lawyers together. When he first told me 4.5 years ago he wanted to be leader, I wasn't clear whether he could go on to be the Prime Minister. I was unclear what his motives were, bearing in mind how difficult the task was. But he had a sense of conviction and confidence that made him think he could do it. He made us believe he could do it, and he's worked so hard. He's built a team around him, the shadow cabinet, MPs, candidates, our staff, our volunteers have followed Keir's confidence and leadership. It's been difficult. There's been some wobbly moments. There have been times where, you know, we've thought it wasn't possible. In my wildest dreams, 4.5 years ago, did I think we'd be here? No. Keir did, though, and he deserves massive credit for getting us here.
Sadiq, Mayor of London, you sound a bit like though you thought he was crackers to take it on.
Well, and I said to Keir, you know, one of my best friends took on this job in 2010. We fell short in 2015.
Ed Miliband, you're referring
to?
Yeah,
I've seen great politicians take on the worst job in politics, being leader of Her Majesty's official opposition. Keir said he believed in himself, he believed in his vision. He knew about hard work, but Keir's motivation is public service. This guy took on cases for me without taking a fee. He would act for clients without asking for money. He believes in hard work. I think what you'll see is him being magnanimous tomorrow, him being humble, and him demanding every Labour MP served with humility.
Just to say that we've got another Labour hold. This is in Washington and Gateshead South. Labour have hung on to that seat. Sharon Hodgson is re-elected there as the MP. So that is 5 seats for Labour, 4 holds, 1 gain. So a lot of those seats, in fact, all those seats are in the north. No, Swindon, we had Swindon South. So most of those seats in the north. What is it about the northeast?
It's a special place, the northeast. It's just a special place. And interesting.
They know how to add up. Yeah.
Well, Naga and Sally told us about all the lengths that they'd gone to in the special paper and all the stuff. But interestingly, that seat in Washington Reform also, it appears, in second place there. But we'll bring you that result in detail when we have it. But Reform, just one of the headaches for the erstwhile Conservative leader Rishi Sunak. But of course, the huge move to Labour we're seeing is the biggest problem for him of all. Let's check in again with Victoria Derbyshire. Victoria, you're at the count now. Have you managed to glean anything from Conservative supporters there?
Honestly, Laura, not particularly. I can tell you that the verification of the ballot papers is almost complete, and the actual counting of the real votes will begin, I'm told, in about half an hour. There's a sort of quiet hum here as the verification continues. What I can tell you is, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Laura, the number of WhatsApps I've been receiving from senior Conservative politicians, which range from despair to some scepticism about the exit poll, particularly when it comes to the number of seats Reform are projected to win, and also some Tory MPs trying very, very hard to look for some positives in that exit poll. One senior MP's reaction to the exit poll was an expletive, which obviously I won't repeat right now in the early hours of the morning.
We're a family show.
Another said the exit poll is Yes, exactly, which is why I'm not repeating it. Another said it was dire, and that he actually couldn't see the Tories even getting 131 seats. He thought Reform would get more than 13.
Took a big dip after that in terms of Brexit, which put a lot of...
Minister, on a much more upbeat note, said, look, if Labour can turn the worst result since the 1930s into their best result, then we have it, we the Conservatives have it all to play for over the next 5 years. Just been chatting to the Reform candidate here, one Lee Taylor. He says he is hopeful of, quote, making a massive dent in Rishi Sunak's majority. The first time we are going to see the Prime Minister, as he still is, we're expecting at about 3:30, so in about 3 hours this afternoon, he will arrive with the other 12 candidates here, and we're expecting the result in Richmond and Northallerton at about 4 a.m. this morning.
Victoria, thanks very much indeed. We'll talk to you later.
Also with us here in the studio is Gus O'Donnell, former Cabinet Secretary. And it looks as if we're going to have a new Prime Minister.
Yes.
Now,
months and probably years to come. But I'm very pleased to say, to talk on a separate subject, which we haven't been talking about for a bit, Baroness Varsi is here, Tory peer, of course. Where would we start? What a catastrophe.
But I think the interesting story of the night has got to be Reform. I think following on from what Jane has just said, that actually for me what's fascinating is, and let's see how the night turns out, whether the votes that we're seeing for Reform in these constituencies actually translates into wins. I'm not entirely confident that the number of seats that have been predicted on the exit poll may be met. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But there's something definitely going on here with the Tory vote collapsing and the Reform vote increasing. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. Understand that, one, in terms of what's happening across the country, but understand that in terms of what the Conservative Party has to do to start rebuilding.
Founded policies that appeal to the electorate is a real tribute to him, and I think all of us feel very proud of him.
Well, you've just spoken to him. I know you're a good friend of his. Give us a sense of his mood. You know,
and the most dominant political force north of the border for more than a decade has won every election in that period. And this will be the first time, if the polls are to be believed, that will not happen for the first time in a very, very long time. Now, I've been speaking privately to some senior...
That phrase, knife edge, we heard it a lot in the campaign. We'll have to still wait and see. Things might develop, but it's looking really quite interesting here.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Look, Lindsay's picking up different vibes in the North East. She was saying that in Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, Douglas Ross's prospective constituency, that there is an edginess about that as far as the Conservatives are concerned. Andrew, they are saying the Tories have got the vote out. He's hearing the only solution to any of this, from your point of view, is get the kettle on. Get the kettle on. If it's still cold where you are, get a blanket over your knees. Stick around with us. We're going to be here all night. Ailsa, polling.
Yes.
Not the exit poll, but polling itself. The deeper polling you've been reading into in the run-up to this election.
Yes.
I mean, is it...
And it's able to therefore win more seats. So it's not getting more votes in the seats where it doesn't need them, but it is getting those votes where it does need them to win seats. Why is that happening? Is it tactical voting? Why is that happening in this election, if indeed it continues to do so?
Well, there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, you have demographic changes.
8 days from now, you're still at home. If you're one of those people who wants to get away, you're more likely to be an alliance voter.
Nôl yng Nghymru. Rhyddaglen, da ni'n credu fydd y cyntaf I gyhoeddi. Fe allai'r etholaeth yna fod yn ddiddorol iawn. Margaret Ferrier, aelod yr SNP, oedd yn cynrychioli'r etholaeth honno, ond fe dorodd hi reolau Covid ac fe gollodd hi gefnogaeth y blaid ac y blaid lafur ath hi gyda gogwydd o 20% mewn is-etholiad y llynedd. Felly ni'n disgwyl y canlyniad yna tua hanner awr wedi 1. Nawr, tra bod ni'n aros am y canlyniad, wy'n falch iawn o weid bod gen I gwmni fan hyn yn Glasgow, Dr Catrin Jones sy'n llawfeddyg fan hyn yn Glasgow, a'r parchedig John Owain Jones sy'n byw yn Greenock. Croeso ato ni. Beth am i ni ddechrau falle gyda canlyniad yr arolwg cynnar yna sy'n awgrymu bod yr SNP yn mynd i golli tir sylweddol mynd lawr i 10 sedd, o 48 i lawr i 10, colli 38 sedd. Os yw hynny'n wir, faint o ergyd fydd hynny i'r SNP?
Anferth. O'n i'n teimlo, mae yna ddisgwyl di bod ers cryn dipyn amser.
In graphic form, what has happened so far this evening, and that is that Labour have 5 seats there, 4 holds, 1 gain. And it looks as if Reform are in second place there, but that's actually because of the wonderful way that their share vote has been holding out. They have been coming second in so many of the seats that have taken place so far that we've had declarations on. So that's why they are up there with Labour, because of the size of the share of their vote. But all the declarations so far this evening have been for Labour wins.
Now, let's take you back to Swindon South. That result there, which was the first Labour win of the night, the first of them taking a seat from their opponents. We can speak to Sir Robert Buckland, who gave that very strong speech from the stage. Robert Buckland, like many people who will be losing their seats tonight from different parties, commiserations to you. We say that to all of the candidates who may lose out. But in your speech, you gave a very strong warning. It was clear to your party not to carry on behaving in the way that it has, and not to go into some kind of circus in the way that you clearly feel they have done in recent years.
Yeah, Laura, I'm fed up of performance art politics. I've watched colleagues in the Conservative Party strike poses, write inflammatory op-eds and say stupid things they know have no evidence for, instead of concentrating on doing the job that they were elected to do. I've had enough of it. I want the Conservative Party to get back to the ethos of doing.
May just have beaten the Labour incumbents, who was going to be the Culture Secretary.
Might be one of the only seats Labour's lost to the Greens, which is very exciting. I mean, I'm hearing good things from Bristol as well. I mean, obviously, we're not going to get that count for a little bit, but that is very exciting. I was with Carla last week. She's ran a fantastic campaign. I've been with the Greens in 3 of their 4 target constituencies. The support's been amazing, really, really great.
But you might just end up with 1 MP again.
I think we'll end up with more than that. I mean, the exit poll said 2, but it doesn't get into the specific circumstances.
Because the second would be Sian Berry.
I think we've got great hopes for Ellie Chowns in North Herefordshire. I was with her on the banks of the River Wye. Let's not forget, one of the reasons that the Conservatives have had such a kicking tonight is because they seem to have become the party who hates nature, who is against good food and farming, who doesn't mind polluting our rivers, have done many, many things that are irresponsible. We've seen nature depleted in the UK over the last 14 years, and there are many, many reasons why the Tories have got a kicking tonight. But the fact that they've done so little for nature, and of course that Rishi Sunak went massively backwards on the commitment to net zero, basically diminishing our standing in the eyes of the entire world, and setting back the cause of a just transition to a greener economy by more than a year.
Richard, I mean, Harriet wanted us to talk a little bit more about the journey, and you've been on a journey.
Certainly
with
have.
Labour. I mean, what was it about Keir Starmer reaching out to business that won you round?
Keir and Rachel. I mean, look, I think if you consider where they were only one election ago, they have systematically changed the Labour Party layer by layer. They've scourged the poison of Corbynism, and they've gone from the worst defeat since the 1930s to now possibly the biggest in a generation.
There he is, actually, because he's at his count in Islington.
There he is.
He's just arrived.
Yeah.
I think that description of Corbynism is contested, but that's certainly your view of it.
No, absolutely. I mean, and you know, he's brought them back to the pragmatic centre. You know, very pro-business, very pro-growth, of course, and that's a party that I can work with, and that business wants to work with as well. So, you know, it's absolutely the right agenda for us.
Carol. Is this what you wanted? Is this what you've been working for?
I think we should get the party started. I mean, everyone's looking very glum round these parts.
I'm
Come on.
what's
in your coffee cup? Landslide. 14 years of corruption and lies and gaslighting. You've got two disgraced chancellors, Tory chancellors in this studio. You've got Nadine Dorries, you know, a woman who barely turned up as her last year as an MP. And everybody out there is thinking, no more of this, no more of the lies, of the deceit, of the corruption, of the VIP PPE lane scandal, the betting scandal. I mean, who could ever have thought that a government would be as utterly banal and ridiculous as this one? So let's get the party started because they have gone.
I'll drink to that.
Yay!
Cheers. There we go.
Hey, cheers.
But what do you really think, Carol?
I've spent 18 months now, you know, like hours and hours and hours a day, just out of a passion for...
Because it's been very
absolute warrior on Twitter as well.
Well,
you know,
I mean,
dismantling
it's
the Tories.
Passion because
but what motivated you in the first place? Because it was very surprising suddenly seeing you bursting onto the.
Well, I tell you what motivated me was the lies, was Partygate and the VIP PPE lane, and in a way, the media not pushing it forward as they should was a disgrace, and I could not believe, and there were people today who were taking photographs outside their polling stations saying, "This is for you, Dad. I couldn't see my father when they were partying. I couldn't see my father. Oh, this is for you, Nan, because we had to say goodbye on FaceTime." And people have not forgotten, and it doesn't matter how many times politicians say, "Oh, well, you know, oh, well, it was just a bit of cake," or "Oh, it was this or that," and endlessly sit in studios saying this stuff because people are living it out there. And that's why they are going down and out tonight, and I am so here for it.
Yeah. No, I mean, how can you disagree with that? How can you disagree with that? And now what we have to do is, how can we not be excited by a change of government right now? But we do have huge expectations. And one of the slight problems we've got is that Labour, in the run-up to this extraordinary moment, and massive congratulations to them, it's a great win tonight, they have somewhat diminished our expectations of what they might actually do and how fast they might do it and with what kind of gusto. And I'm not just referring to the obviously environmental agenda that I'm particularly concerned about, but also in terms of really sorting out the frontline services like the NHS. They've got to be bolder in how they're going to raise the money needed to do that. And at the moment, it looks like a continuation of managed decline. We need something like the Greens' proposition of a wealth tax, which many wealthy people would be happy to pay. We're talking about 1% for people worth 10 million or more, 2% if you're worth $1 billion. That would raise many, many billions that could do a proper job of rebuilding the NHS at speed. To say you can do it all through growth, and Richard may be happy that the conditions for growth are there, but it's somewhat arrogant to say we're just going to be able to grow the economy in order to spend the money to sort out the mess that the Tories have created.
We can't rely on growth alone, absolutely not. We can't grow a way out of all the problems. And
you wouldn't mind being taxed a little bit more, would you, Richard?
Certainly not on income. I'd certainly wouldn't be so happy on wealth, but I think there are, you know, I don't think...
But shouldn't the wealthy... with the broader shoulders, bear a little bit more responsibility for making sure that we get the changes we need.
But let's make sure we're a centrist, pragmatic government that, you know, is pro-business and pro-growth. This is a growth agenda, not a tax agenda. I think it's really important not to scare off, you know, the wealth creators and those who are actually... Don't forget, taxes on profits.
You were obviously in the coalition government that tried to push through an austerity agenda, and at the time you defended it and felt it was needed. I mean, when you hear Rory talking about this being another austerity government in effect, because there are built-in departmental spending cuts in the future years, which are pretty hard to avoid because growth won't be that quick to avoid it. Is he right? I mean, do you see austerity coming down the line? And where would the Liberal Democrats stand on that?
People like Paul Johnson have been making it very clear that there's an enormous gap between you know, what is committed in terms of spending and the tax yield. I mean, whoever's in government, whichever party it was, is going to have to raise taxes.
And we're going to dance fight it.
The whole issue. Well, no, we will want to establish how fair it actually is. But basic realism requires that this is going to happen. It's unfortunate that this was not debated properly in the election. But going back to the coalition, I mean, we inherited the fallout from the great financial crisis. It was an economic heart attack. You know, whoever was in government would have been imposing very difficult measures. And similarly, the next Labour government is going to inherit an enormous deficit that they're going to have to deal with. I feel for them in a way. I mean...
Question in Cardiff. Jeremy.
Funny you should mention that. Yes, right here with it, Clive. So let's just explain. The swingometer measures the movement of votes between parties from one election to another. And if the proportion of votes stays the same, then the swing would be 0, and you can see the needle here. And if that were to be the case, then all the red seats stay red and all the blue seats stay blue. It's not going to be 0 after tonight. We were listening, weren't we, to Robert Buckland. You can see over here, his seat would fall on a 6% swing. There it is, Swindon South, and so it did. But Labour are going beyond that. I could put the half-dozen results that we've had into the swingometer, and we can measure the actual swing. Not the exit poll now, this is the actual swing. So let's just move it and see what's happening. Before we look, 12.7% is the swing required for a majority of one. If you have 12.7%, Labour have it in every single seat, they get a one-seat majority. Where are they now? Just slightly shy of 11%. So that would have them, if it was 11% swing in every single seat, on an extra 98 seats. So you're thinking to yourself, how come this is an extraordinary night for Labour with what seems to be a fairly modest swing so far? Now, OK, as we get more results, the swing may go up. At the moment, if it's 11%, if you simply paint them in logically, these seats are all Labour and these seats stay Conservative. But here's what's actually happening. In places where they need a bigger swing, Labour are getting it. So have a look at what our exit poll is projecting. And I'm just going to wash the red across the right-hand side of the screen here, and you will see. This is the remarkable thing about Labour's performance, is that where they didn't need a very big swing, for example, in their own already safe seats, they haven't got one. Instead, they've targeted seats they desperately need. Maybe they're in second place to the Conservatives. And it looks like, from our exit poll, predictions only, at 13%, they're taking all the seats. At 14%, they're taking nearly all of them. At 15%, and you know what? We should move it round a bit more. Where does this very targeted Labour swing stop? This is the secret of Labour's victory, if victory it is. This, remember, is our prediction, it's our exit poll, but it shows them possibly in Romford, Redditch, Herne Bay, getting seats on a swing of 20%. Now, part of what's happening is the targeting of the Labour vote. The other thing is that the Conservatives seem to be hemorrhaging most in places where they're stronger. So for them, it really is a perfect storm.
All right, Jeremy, thank you for that. It's interesting, isn't it?
You promised a swingometer. It's an absolute swingometer, for a very, very fancy swingometer indeed, ready for 2024.
It's not even a real swingometer, it's a virtual one. You remember those the real ones that they had in the studio?
Cardboard.
Bit of cardboard, yeah. Well, it's all high-tech now.
I got paid £100 by the BBC to programme swingometer.
Oh, really?
You got, hang on, so former Cabinet Secretary Augusta O'Donnell, this is a big revelation. We should welcome Don Butler from Labour, who's sitting alongside. You got 170 quid for working on a swingometer.
Working with David Butler, we had a calculator and we turned the handle of the calculator, a piece of paper come up, I'd hand it to David Butler and say, the swing is 5.4% and the turnout is up, whatever.
Oh, well, there you go.
Well, you heard it here first.
Come on that much.
What do you mean things haven't come on that much? Blimey, but we welcome you, Don Butler, from the Labour Party, and we'll check in with you shortly.
Right, we're going to go to Islington. And Helena Wilkinson, who's standing by there. And that is, I'm assuming that's Islington North for the Jeremy Corbyn count. Oh, I got that wrong. I've got that wrong. Oh, no, I've got that right.
Right. You have got that right, Clive. It's also, we're expecting two declarations here for Islington North. Jeremy Corbyn and also Islington South and Finsbury. What I'm going to do is step out of the camera because I'm sure you want to see Jeremy Corbyn on the count floor, get a better view of him. You can see him having a chat to various people there. I saw him arrive about 40 minutes ago, looking relaxed. He's been chatting away. In the last 10 minutes, he did look at his watch, so keen to probably get a move on and get the declarations out of the way. But this is a unique battle here because Jeremy Corbyn is standing as an independent against the Labour Party, the party which he was once leader of. And as I say, it is a very unique battle. Now, in terms of how his team are feeling, well, I think they are feeling positive, but it's interesting that no one really wants to talk to us yet because I think the result at the moment in terms of predicting it is quite uncertain. But Jeremy Corbyn there standing as an independent candidate against the Labour candidate Praful Nargand. He is yet to arrive, but we've also, as I say, Clive, waiting for Emily Thornberry, who is a candidate in the Islington South and Finsbury seat here as well. The hard work is continuing here. Verification for most of the areas is now complete, and so the counting is well underway. Lots of sweets laid out on tables. The bags have not yet been opened, but I did see one of the counters unwrap a banana. So clearly they need a bit more energy.
Oh, yes. We need some bananas here in the studio. I've only got some bit of fruit, nuts, peanuts here, but no bananas. I did suggest actually that. Oh, you've got some.
Yeah,
okay, I'm going to have one of those a little bit later on. Off camera, I hasten to add.
Right. We need to crack on with the serious business of the evening. You two are enjoying it still. It's far too much. I want to take us to our colleague Aleem Maqbool, who is in Rochdale. Good evening to you, Aleem. Now, lots of people watching tonight will remember that in February, in that by-election, George Galloway, veteran left-winger politician, came blasting back in and won the by-election there, trying to hang on tonight, but facing competition from a former journalist, actually, Paul Wall, who's standing there for the Labour Party. So what's your sense of the way it's going tonight?
Well, recent polls have shown that it's pretty close. Labour Party members who are looking at a bit of sampling seem a touch more relaxed now than they did at the beginning of the evening, but it is close and extraordinary, given the national picture that you've been talking about over the last few hours, that we are talking about Labour nervousness in seats which are long-time Labour strongholds like Rochdale. But about 2 weeks ago, they actually called for more help canvassing in other seats they considered battleground states. Again, a similar profile where in some cases they won in 2019 by more than 20 points. What do all these places have in common? Well, they have high Muslim populations, and the feeling is that there will be, in a lot of those constituencies, a protest vote against the way Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have handled the Gaza crisis, the fact that they abstained from that November ceasefire vote, for example. So, as well as Rochdale, where you rightly say George Galloway's looking to hold on to the seat that he won in February, there are other seats to look out for later in the day. Some in Birmingham, Ladywood, Perry Barr, Leicester South as well, the Bradford seats as well, and other Lancashire seats in Blackburn, for example. So, as I say, interesting that given everything that's going on, that potentially the Muslim vote from 2019 could have gone down from around 80%, according to a lot of research, to perhaps 60%. But that has also led to a lot of apathy among Muslim voters, if research is to be believed.
Aleem, thank you so much. It's one of the really interesting patterns we're going to be looking out for, not just as he was saying there in Rochdale, where there was that enormous impact with the Galloway by-election earlier this year, but in lots of other pockets of the country, something that Labour has been nervous about.
Yeah, in those early declarations that we've had, the Reform vote going up, their share of the vote, beating the Conservatives into second place in a number of those seats, all of them so far being held by Labour, or one, as in the case of Swindon, by Labour from the Conservatives. And one of those seats that they're keeping their eye on, Reform, is Ashfield. And Sean Dilley is there for us now. That is where Lee Anderson is standing. Local boy, a minor. started out as a Labour councillor, then he went to the Conservatives, then he was an independent, now he's standing for reform, and they clearly are hoping, Sean, that they should be able to win this.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Lee Anderson says that his views and his politics hasn't changed. He says the party's has. Lee Anderson isn't here yet. In fact, none of the candidates are here. But who are here are the election agents and the people who represent the parties. I'm just going to bring the camera over my shoulder a little bit of behind the scenes here at Ashfield, because some of the counting, it has been rather close. We've been chatting to various party officials who are standing over with clipboards. They have the ability to look at the ballot papers. The secrecy of the vote's guaranteed, but they get to have a look who's cast, or at least, you know, that boxes have X's in them. So we've had a chat to Reform Party representatives. They say that it's looking on their number crunching, which they do on their clipboards, to be about a 2 to 3% lead to Reform. That's what they reckon. We've spoken to the same people from the Labour Party representing their candidate, Ria Keane, and they say, well, it's too close to call. Well, for want of an old political expression, for some of our older viewers, Mandy Rice-Davies, they would say that, wouldn't they? The big scandal of the night here, though, Clive, is not the price of the coffee. It's only £1 a cup of coffee. But it turns out that they don't take cards. You have to have cash on you. So it's sort of a bit of an homage to its old-fashioned roots. But you're quite right. People are keeping their eye on Lee Anderson. And if the vote share that's seen in other constituencies or anything to go by, Lee Anderson, though he's not here at the moment, he's certainly going to be encouraged by them.
We would need a Blair-style swing, a 1997 level swing, and then we're presented with an exit poll that actually shows a 1997 style majority. Now, there is some genuinely, this is an expectation.
Overturning a 15,000 seat majority. The Liberal Party had that in 1906. It has not been Lib Dem before. And this is Greg Clark's old seat. I mean, very briefly, I think Ian Dale, the LBC journalist and presenter, was standing in that seat. Maybe he had a sort of wise...
Is at a 70-year high, the first parliament on record where living standards are lower at the end than they were at the beginning. We can't promise to turn everything around straight away, but we will get to work in starting to rebuild our economy, bringing growth back to our economy and starting to turn around public services that have been so neglected by this Conservative government.
How much time do you think that the electorate will give you to try to start to turn the supertanker around?
Well, let us get started. We still don't have all the results from the elections. Let's wait to see how that unfolds. But whoever forms the next government, whatever composition it takes, the scale is huge. But we are ready for it.
Yeah, but my question remains the same, Rachel Reeves.
I am ready for that challenge.
Yeah, my question remains the same, Rachel Reeves, which is how long do you think you have?
Well, look, we've said that we are looking for a decade of national renewal to reform our public services, to bring the growth back to our economy, to improve living standards. But we want to get started work straight away. Our first steps on bringing stability back to the economy, 40,000 additional appointments every single week in our National Health Service, recruiting 6,500 teachers into our state schools. Those are the first steps that we will take if we are privileged enough to form the next government as we start to turn our economy and our public services
I think you're going to have to change that record. I think it's a foregone conclusion now, given what we've been looking at. Andy Burnham's here.
Well, it's just to say, like I've said...
Got to bring you home, didn't I?
Doing the Scottish story, and there could be some very interesting things, and a lot of these things depend on what happens with the Tories in Scotland. Perth and Kinross is worth looking at. So, the classic example there.
For people from my own party that I could
considered. If we're lucky enough to serve in the Labour government, and these exit polls are to be believed, and they are the most reliable polls of all the polls. You know, how we do business and how we do international business and how we approach that needs to be truly considered. And I think the party's current position is the right position. It took a while to get there.
We just see Rachel Reeves there at her count in Leeds. You can just see the side of her head. She's well on track to become the first female Chancellor. We'll see by the morning if that comes to pass. But there she is at her count in Leeds.
It would be interesting.
She'll
make a great Chancellor, Rachel will.
We'll see if that comes to pass. What is interesting about the share of Labour's vote so far, and according to the exit poll, is that it could well be that Keir Starmer has a whopping majority of 170. But actually on a lower share of the vote than Jeremy Corbyn. What are your thoughts on that?
I think really you need to compare it to the Tory share of the vote, right? I mean, at the last election, what did the Tories get? Was it 37%? Their lowest share of the vote in, I think, 23 years, and they served in government. So what I think we need to talk about is, you know, they had a right to govern with that. So let's look at where we land at the end of this and what Labour's share will be. And at the end of the day, you know, we will hopefully be in government.
But given that share for Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, does that potentially mean that even with a majority of 170, people on the left are going to feel that they have a right, they do anyway, but have even more of a right to make their voice heard from the backbenches?
I think what the discussion will be about is PR, proportional representation. I think there'll be lots of people talking about PR. I think if you look at...
But you're not talking about that.
Well, I think the public will be talking about proportional representation and whether we need to have a debate about it. And I've always said that we do need to have a debate about it around the country, because I think we're going to need to look at the share of the Green vote, the share of the Lib Dem vote, the share of the Labour vote, and then we need to do the number crunching when we see that.
Just one quick stat. Conservatives were 43.6% of the vote last time round, a bit higher than you were suggesting. I don't mean to just put that into the conversation. Do you think that's going to come then, a conversation about the voting system after this election?
Oh, I think so. I think there'll be, I mean, there's already, but if you think about it, there's already a debate around PR, and I think that there's always has been a debate around PR, but I think even stronger now there will be a debate around PR after this.
But not at the high echelons of the Labour Party, one suspects. If on the first pass of the post you're getting a majority of 170.
Oh yeah, I mean, we wouldn't argue with the results. I mean, this is delivered for us. But actually, at Labour Party conference, we did pass a motion on PR.
Yeah, well, Keir Starmer, I think, once upon a time believed that PR was a good system, but it's not something that made it into the Labour Party manifesto. But Dawn Butler, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's take a look then, as Clive, you were just suggesting there, that the turnout in lots of places has not been great, and the vote share for Labour, despite what looks like it's going to turn out to be a whopping majority, may actually not be as convincing as the way that the Conservatives won a majority of 80 back in 2019. Rita, you've been looking at the turnout. What's it panning out as?
Panning out is quite low at the moment, Laura, and this is based on the results that we have in so far. So we've had 6 seats declared so far, and we're looking at 54% turnout based on those 6 seats, which is, you know, it's not resounding, really, is it? 54% was what we got in Newcastle Central. Let me show you the whole graph here, because it does make for interesting reading. We go right back to 1980, when Margaret Thatcher was in power, and you can see there the heady days of turnout were in the high 70s. They went up, actually, in 1992, you know, just peaking there at a little bit below 80%. Then you see something of a decline after 1997 when Tony Blair came in. We have Blair, Brown, Cameron, May, Johnson. The eagle-eyed amongst you will say, well, where is Liz Truss? And there were no elections fought when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, which is why she is not up here on our chart. So at the moment, we are suggesting 54%. Now, that will change over the night, because obviously we've got many, many, many more results to come in. But it looks as if, our number crunchers are suggesting, it looks as if we might be on course in 2024 to have a turnout roughly around what there was in 2005. So that was the election, Tony Blair's 3rd victory, and that was a turnout there of roughly 60% or so, a little bit higher than 60%. Anyway, we'll be keeping an eye on that, but that is where we are at the moment. Laura.
Rita, thank you. It's really interesting to see it in that historical context when you see that voters really, really engage, and maybe this time that won't have happened, but plenty of data still to be putting into all of those graphs as the night develops. Well, let's show you again the results of that exit poll. Labour, of course, hopes very much this will make their dreams come true and be something like the real result when we get it in full by the end of the night. Labour there just disappeared. They were on 410 seats projected, with the Tories crashing to 131 seats projected, lower than they were back in 1997 when Tony Blair didn't quite wipe them out. The Liberal Democrats forecast also to have had an extremely successful night, up on 61. But you can see their Reform suggested they're on course for 13 seats. Now, remember, we're being very cautious about the smaller parties like Reform and the SNP, who the exit poll puts on 10 seats. That would be an absolute thumping for the party who's been in control of the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood for some time. They are expecting to slide back, but perhaps not to quite that low level. And the Greens on 2. They were targeting 4 seats very reluctantly, but the exit poll suggests that they'll have taken an extra 1. But there you are, the big headline, Keir Starmer on the front of Old Broadcasting House with a projected 410 seats.
Indeed. Chris Mason, our political editor, is here. You've got a couple of nuggets.
Couple of nuggets. So the Liberal Democrats, just picking up on Laura's reflections there on their numbers, they are wearing broad smiles tonight. They're talking about Davies' dozen, the 12 seats that they are declaring victory in. I won't read them all, but just a couple that catch the eye. Wimbledon in southwest London, Cheadle and Hazel Grove in Greater Manchester, Wokingham, formerly the seat of John Redwood. And they also think they may well have won in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, which I'm told last went Liberal in 1906. So they are pretty confident there. And also Harpenden and Esher in Surrey. Esher was the seat of the former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, who was standing down at the election. But just a sense there of the geography of where the Lib Dems are feeling confident. Of course, we await actual results in all of those.
And of course, also the Lib Dems, they're coming up with Davies' dozen. So congratulations to them coming up with the first headline of the night. It's classic. Congratulations, Lib Dem.
Power. Labour sources reckoning that, according to their data, perhaps 13 for Reform, as projected in the exit poll, might be at the upper end of where Reform end up.
But have you had any hint from Labour HQ of nervousness about some of their seats, even perhaps going to Reform? Because I've been hearing a little bit of that tonight.
Absolutely, keeping an eye on some seats in South Yorkshire, for instance, and elsewhere. So, yeah, and of course, both of those things could be true, couldn't they? But let's see.
And one other little nugget just before we moved on. Our BBC colleagues on the ground in Basildon and Billericay, where the Conservative Party chairman, Richard Holden, did one of the quickest chicken runs you've ever seen in your life, stampeding to try to find himself a safe seat. But our colleagues there on the ground are suggesting that Richard Holden, who as Conservative chair theoretically should be in charge of this campaign, but he may well end up actually losing his seat. So we'll bring you more news from there as we hear. But that would be another scalp for the Conservative Party to lose to Labour.
It's all happening. It's all happening. But what's happening with the person, it seems as if, will be becoming the Prime Minister? Sir Keir Starmer. His seat, of course, Holborn and St Pancras in North London. And Fiona Bruce is there. What are you hearing, Fiona?
Well, no nervousness here about losing his seat, I have to say. I mean, the counting is taking place now. They've got twice the number of counters here that they had last time around. Obviously, this is a very big night for Holborn and St Pancras. Let me just show you. So there you've got the ranks of desks, people counting. There's actually 2 constituencies being counted here. Holborn and St Pancras, which is Keir Starmer's, then Hampstead and Highgate, which is a new constituency because the boundaries have been withdrawn. So they're counting there. They're actually counting on 2 different floors. Keir Starmer's due to arrive here, we think, about 2:30, and we think that's when we'll get the result. We're all waiting for his moment when he comes. I just thought I'd show you a little bit behind the scenes what it's like while you're waiting for the man who we think is likely to be Prime Minister turning up. Here we are with my colleagues. As you can see, it's a very glamorous setup, and there's a lot of crisps and that kind of thing to fuel everyone keeping on going. The one thing I have managed to find out, I have to say Labour are being very disciplined about what they are saying as the night goes on. They are keeping a very tight rein on things. I've been texting MPs left, right and centre. What we do know is that there is an event happening in central London after this count. The party activists and staff are going to be there. It's a place in central London. They're not confirming that Keir Starmer will turn up, but to be honest, I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. And then we will be trying to follow him there and see what happens later on.
OK, Fiona, thank you. Gateshead Central and Wickham, apparently, is another Labour hold. So they have hung on to that seat. Mark Ferguson is the new MP there.
OK, we'll bring you that result in more detail just as soon as we get it. But let's say hello to Dehenna Davidson, former Conservative MP, one of the standout victories of last time round. It's good to have you with us in the studio here, and we're rejoined again by Lord Mandelson. Dehenna, when you look at the kinds of results that we are expecting, this absolute historic crash for the Conservative Party, such a stark difference to when you were elected, why has it happened, do you think?
A range of reasons. I think the key one, too, we've been in power for 14 years. It would be very unusual, I think, for a government to win again.